What I remember, sorry, go ahead.
And we're live. Hello and welcome to the third episode of Adored Tech. I'm your host, Donny. With me, as always, is my co-host, Alex. Alex, how are
How's
you
everybody
doing?
doing?
How are you doing today, Al?
Pretty good.
Not too bad. How's everyone in the chat doing today for us? If you're actually here.
Man, I think it says there's 10 people in this top corner. I don't know if that's how this works.
That should be accurate, I guess. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the RTX 3050 launch. Then we're going to move right into the graphics card prices. There's been a few reports about them actually getting cheaper recently, which is good to hear. Then following that, there's more graphics card talk with the Intel Arc Alchemist leak that came out recently. And then Crysis 4 was announced this week, which is pretty cool. 500 hertz gaming monitors. I don't know if we need that, but they're coming.
That's an excuse for me to talk more about faster CPUs and do more benchmarking.
Absolutely. And then apparently NVIDIA is going to be walking away from their deal with ARM. We'll talk about that later. And then we'll get into some Q&A. So let's start us off with our first topic, which is the RTX 3050 launch. First we'll look at a review here from TechSpot. Steve Walton always does great work, so that's why I like to look at his benchmarks just to get a general idea. I mean, I check other benchmarks too, but for sharing with you guys, these are great for illustrative purposes. We can see performance-wise, the RTX 3050 sits right in between the 2060 and the 2060 Super, so it delivers performance comparable to that of the GTX 1660 Ti, which kind of was what I expected. I think most people expected that too. It's maybe a little unfortunate that it's not more performance considering the price. I mean, even if you just factor the MSRP alone, 250, is about the price you were buying a 1660 Ti for before all this. So you're getting the same performance for the same dollar, theoretically. The thing is, as we know, that's not always how things work out. So the RTX 3050 does end up being more expensive, and we'll get into that in a minute. I did want to stress one thing, though. Since they came out around the same time, and obviously everyone's going to compare them because they're both X50 cards, or however you want to talk about it, the GeForce RTX 3050 is clearly not a competitor to the RX 6500 XT. Whatever your issues with that card is, and there's plenty of them, and there's a lot we can criticize that card for, which we did last week. The card is 37% faster, first of all, and that's at, in the best case scenario. And while that might sound like, oh, that's great, $50 more, and you're getting 30%, 37% more performance, that's really not what ends up happening here. I actually did a report on the availability of the RTX 3050 on launch day and its pricing, which I looked at basically all of the available cards at Micro Center that I could find using a Discord server called the Unofficial Micro Center Discord, where users actually take screenshots, or not screenshots, but take pictures of the cards that are available either through store shelves or the actual sheets like this one that tell you how many cards of what they got that in that day. Micro Center is very good about being pretty transparent about this. At least most stores are. So I was able to come up with that they had an estimated 625 graphics cards nationwide for Micro Center on launch day, which is not very many. I mean, when you compare that to the RX 6600 XT release, which again was still hard to get cards, Micro Center alone reportedly had 2,000 cards on launch day. So that's like almost 4 times as many cards. So this was not a very big launch. Other retailers, while we can't get their numbers exactly, it looked like they also had very few cards. And the thing is the cheapest card Micro Center had on offer was the EVGA RTX 3050 XC Gaming. And that card was $329. And the most expensive card they had was $489. The average selling price between the 5 SKUs that Micro Center was carrying nationwide that I could track was about $411. So the typical selling price the typical purchasing price for this card is going to be over $400. So when you consider that the RX 6500 XT is available right now on Newegg for between $260 and $270, and does come back in stock at that $199 price point, where it sells out instantly, by the way. These cards are not comparable in any way. In fact, I would say the RTX 3050 is a bad deal at anything above 350, because if you're spending above 350, you should be going to Newegg and buying an RX 6600 for around 450, which I will get into more a bit later, but they are available at that price.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you can, as you said, right now go on Newegg and buy a 6500 XT. So, I mean, I know a lot of people are going to be talking about that MSRP number, which we just really like to float around, but I mean, as far as it is to me, that's just sort of a fantasy number for graphics cards at this point. What you can actually buy them for on the street from retailers, and if availability is there, is more important than that, at least, to me. I think that, you said this is what, $350 roughly, $400 is the number that you're going to pay for these cards?
You're going to pay over $400 most of the time for one of these cards. And in my opinion, after you get past $350, it no longer becomes worth it.
I mean, yeah. So once it's at $450, you can right now buy a 6600 for about $445 or something.
They're in stock at Newegg between $450 and $470 pretty consistently right now.
Do you still have the page up for the benchmarks from Gamers? I'm sorry, from Steve?
I could bring that back up.
TechSpot.
Sure.
TechSpot, not Hardware Unbox, because that's the website. Yeah, I mean, look at the difference between the 3050 right here, and look at the difference between the 6600.
Yeah, the 6600 perfectly matches the RTX 3060 in performance in this chart. This is at 1080p, by the way, guys. At 1440p, it's still similar. I mean, the 3060 leads a little bit more, but the 3050 is still far behind. So the 6600 is definitely a much better deal if you're planning to pay over $400 for a graphics card, or around that price point.
So Modna asked, what's stopping AMD from telling retailers sell at this price or we'll pull your supply?
So the simple fact is retailers aren't the ones really setting the price. It's the AIB manufacturers who are the producers of the graphics cards. And the reason why AMD can't, or NVIDIA can't do that, is because for the most part right now, these cards are the MSRP that AMD and NVIDIA set are very close, if not under, the cost of manufacturing. So the actual bill of materials, or BOM, as they call it in the industry. And so you can't, as AMD and NVIDIA, dictate to your customer that they need to sell a product at a loss, because they won't do it, and they won't sell the products then. Or they need to sell at razor-thin margins. I'm not suggesting that they aren't making money at some of these very high MSRPs, especially, an RTX 3050 for $489 from Asus. Asus is making money on that card, yes. But at $249, are they making money? Probably not. Not with the price of memory as it is right now. Not with the supply chain. And the biggest problem with the supply right now is the fact that these companies have to pay an extremely large amount for shipping to the stores. A lot of stores are actually, because of the demand, are getting in cards through FedEx on a daily basis or every other day. Like Micro Center is doing that. But those cards are usually being airmailed, and airmail costs more. And even the price of shipping on a boat is way higher than it was, in early 2020 or 2019. So
this is really important. The last time we saw something like this was when AMD had trouble getting enough, or the motherboard manufacturers had trouble getting enough X570 boards out during launch for those X570 boards, and the companies were airmailing the motherboards there, and you had at least a 30% increase in cost to buy one of those motherboards because the cost of shipping went up drastically. And in everything else that we've seen over the past 24 months, the cost of absolutely any kind of logistics is absolutely insane. The sort of, I mean, and again, a graphics card is not just a GPU and then you just send the card off. There's a bunch of other components that all cost money and have the same supply issues.
Yeah. So with that, we're going to segue into our other topic, which is our graphics cards getting cheaper. Recently, 3dcenter.org, which I will pull up in a second, did a like a pricing graph. These are prices for Germany, but they give us a good idea of whether or not graphics cards are actually getting cheaper. We could see in this chart here that basically since January, since December of 2021, prices for Radeon cards have dropped from being 178% more expensive to 167% more expensive at German retailers. And then for GeForce cards, they went from 183% more expensive to 177% more expensive. So, that's still a lot more than they should be. And when they say more expensive, it's they're tracking against MSRP. So if it's 167%, it's 167% of MSRP. I should clarify. So it does look like we are at least on the way down, but obviously if you look at that chart over time, these kind of dips have happened before and then they come back up. So we need to see over more time whether or not it's going to stick, and hopefully we keep going down that way in that trajectory. But if you look at Newegg, at least for Radeon cards, they do have them in stock. Cards like the RX 6600, which we talked about before, and the RX 6700, 6600 XT, and even the RX 6700 XT and 6500 XT are all typically in stock, although obviously you're not going to be paying MSRP for them. But in the case of the 6600 series, those cards go from 450, 460, 480 for the 6600 to about 500, 510 on the low end for the 6600 XT. Although there is one card here you can see for that's about $600, and at that price, it's not very good, but I think it's still purchasable if you really, really want to.
We have kind of an interesting question here from KM Pewter Tech Supplies.
Okay.
Which is, does the driver overhead issue still exist? Because if it does, I think it's really important to include these for lower end GPU reviews. I actually have a video about this that's been in the works for a little while. I mean, it really depends on the game, the CPU that you're using, and a bunch of other factors, but yes, it does. But the degree that it matters really sort of depends on your situation.
Yeah.
If you've got like a 5800X, probably not. But I mean, if you also have that CPU, you're probably not buying one of these mid-range GPUs or lower end ones. Although maybe you are, because you just, you can't afford $700 for a GPU. I honestly, that's kind of a different question.
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to talk about with the pricing of these Radeon cards right now is that something I noticed, at least, is that at 450-ish for 6600, you're getting very close to the same performance per dollar that you would have been getting if you bought an RTX 2060 Super or RTX 2070. For their like respective MSRP are basically what they were going for average in the market, before this hyperinflation that we've started to see. So like early 2020, late 2019 prices. So like at the very least, if you are in the market for like a $500 graphics card, right now is not the worst time to buy an RX 6600 or even a 6600 XT, because that's pretty reasonable price to performance ratio. While it's unfortunate that since 2020 we haven't gone up in price to performance ratio in that class, when you compare it to what things were, it's a lot better. I'm hopeful that as more people maybe start buying these cards, or just these cards existing at this price point and sitting obviously in stock, that will kind of anchor things down and bring prices back down to reality. But that's going to require other things too. But this is at least grounding things a bit more.
Mm-hmm. We have a question from Dave, and he's kind of asking about your comment before about MSRP. And he said, so basically what you're saying is that NVIDIA and AMD are lying about the MSRP if
Absolutely.
that is below or at cost.
Yeah, absolutely. They're setting an MSRP because they can set whatever price they want because they don't sell these cards direct to consumer. They don't produce these boards. I mean, yeah, there are Founders Edition cards and the reference cards from AMD and NVIDIA, but those are in very short supply, and they're essentially just there to be token products at MSRP for when they do sell them. But the truth is that, and I'll let you get to your point, Alex. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
The truth is that any price AMD or NVIDIA sets at MSRP doesn't matter, and they should be setting more realistic MSRPs to not create unrealistic expectations for consumers going in. There was no reason why the RTX 3050 should have been compared to the RX 6500 XT before launch in the way that it was. Everyone assumed that these cards were comparable, but they're not, because NVIDIA had a very optimistic MSRP to be as nice as possible, right? But the RX 6500 XT, while their MSRP is probably a little bit out of line, it's not as far off, and it's much more realistic. Do I think that AMD probably should have still set it a little bit higher? Yes. But the truth is the RX 6500 XT's primary purpose is for OEMs anyway. And so at that point, it's a little bit more of a wash. As for the 3050, every report I've heard is that they're not going to be getting very many of those cards, even for OEMs. And so it kind of becomes this product that doesn't really exist in the market. You might see it here and there, but the truth is RTX 2060 12 gigs are still on store shelves more often. RTX 3060 12 gigs are still on stores more often, and those are in that same sort of $400 to $500 price point, maybe a little bit higher. But why would board manufacturers not just release those? It costs about the same amount of money to produce them. The memory is more expensive, but they're making more money too. So that's what ends up happening. The RTX 3050, as far as I could tell, wasn't ever meant to be released on GA106. It was a GA107 product, but they rushed it out.
Well, it's important to understand too that these aren't, MSRP is really a starting at price, or it's up, or it's at lowest price. Like AMD did this before with the 480s,
or the
8 gig 480s,
oh yeah,
and the Vegas 64s. So technically, all you have to do is have a SKU that is right at cost, and you make a couple runs of it, and that's the MSRP for all of the reviews and benchmarks, and that is the most bone dry card possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
What we have here with a lot of these cards is, and I even saw EVGA many times sell their cards at, what the MSRP was supposed to be on their original cards, but they had a very limited run, and you would often see the higher end version being sold way more. The MSRP for the card, or the starting price, or whatever NVIDIA or AMD say, is not the price for, and this is very important here. This is not the price of a Strix card or a Turbo card or whatever. Each of those companies make their own card, and those cards have their own MSRPs, which can be changed at any given time.
Yeah, and
so the AMD technically did not lie with any of their MSRPs because they sold their cards at MSRP on their website.
They also had cards. Both NVIDIA and AMD do enforce some sort of make sure on launch day you release cards at this price point. And so every manufacturer for the RTX 3050 had a variant that was $249 available somewhere, but the supply was not there.
Well, it's also important to understand too that sometimes with these launch cards, they are being shipped on a container in a cheaper, in a cheaper way, sort of in mass. And then everything after that tends to be airmailed. Because these cards are ready to go. I think you guys know this, a month or two before they're actually out on store shelves.
And getting into another topic which will hopefully help these graphics card prices, but I have my doubts. The Intel Arc Alchemist, we've got some leaked information from a recent slide. I have here an article from Video Cards that shows the slide deck. This is specifically for the mobile lineup, but some of this overlaps because it's the same silicon with the desktop lineup. So if we look at this chart, we can see basically there's going to be 5 different SKUs in the mobile lineup, ranging from 96 EUs, which are basically like CUs, but that's what Intel uses, to 512 EUs for the top one. And with memory configurations ranging from 4 gigabytes to 16 gigabytes, all of these will have 16 gigabits per second memory, except for the lowest end ones, the 96 and 128 EU, which will be using 14 gigabits per second memory. And as for the memory bus, we're looking at from 64-bit to 256-bit. As far as I understand, the 512 variant will be available on desktop. And then the 384 EU variant will also be available on desktop with basically the same specs. But the desktop version of the lowest end one, which I think is going to be 128 EU on desktop, will have instead of a 64-bit, it's supposed to have a 96-bit bus. So I don't know what that means exactly for the memory configuration. I'm having a hard time finding the tweet that I originally read from, I think it was Greymon. But that is essentially what we're looking at for the Alchemist lineup. Obviously, we don't know what these are going to perform like exactly, and we have no idea what they'll be priced like. But it is pretty interesting to see that Intel seems to be following AMD here in terms of strategy in some ways, because their top model is going to have 16 gigs of VRAM and a 256-bit bus. At 512 gigabytes a second, I wonder if that's going to be enough memory bandwidth for this. It probably will be, because as far as I understand, this top model isn't going to be like 6800 XT class of performance. It's going to be more like 3070 Ti. And at that rate, that 512 gigabytes should be fine. They might even be a little bit higher for the desktop variant. So what do you think, Alex?
I have this question for you. The assumption for the top end one is supposed to be that it's up to a 3070.
It's based on some leaked benchmarks we've seen and plus rumors. It's going to be around 3070 Ti performance.
What about the one below that?
We know a lot less about that in terms. I don't think there's been as many leaks, but I mean, I can probably extrapolate like from basic benchmarks if I really try to do the math on it. It wouldn't surprise me if that card is probably more in the 3060 range, 66 RX 6600 ish.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that was really my question. I mean, the real thing that everybody will probably be worried about with these cards is drivers and performance in most games, and the bad cases for them, because AMD has not really had a chance, or I'm sorry, Intel has not had a chance to really put out a graphics card before. So I know the really big question for most people that I've spoken to about this is the driver quality and how well they end up being.
Yeah,
and day one launches, all that sort of stuff.
So Intel does have a lot of work to do, and I hope they're doing it in the background on lead up to launch, to ensuring that these cards work with every game, basically, that the drivers do not give people issues launching games or being able to play games. I mean, obviously there's going to be growing pains, there's going to be certain situations, but like if you have the sort of situation that you have now with Intel Xe graphics and like the IGP stuff, where so many things just don't work. I haven't used them myself, but this is just what I hear reported from users and people I talk to regularly that use Intel Xe. They have a hard time playing games, not performance wise, just driver support. Not crashing or the game actually launching or being able to launch in full screen. These are all issues that Intel seems to be having that if they don't sort out, they're not going to be able to sell these cards at any price. At least, I mean, they probably will anyway because we live in a world where everything gets bought, but I still think it won't be doing anybody any favors, that's for sure.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, that's the real big question that, most people that I see are asking. And to me is the real question on to whether or not they can do it. I think on performance, a lot of people might be wondering about, them being able to push the top, have sort of like a flagship card that's top of the line. But I don't think that's as important as being able to get a card that works.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't mind that they won't have a product that compares with the 3080 at launch. If they have supply
Mm-hmm.
and everything works, and they have cards that perform, as well as a 3070, a 3060, and so on, then it'll be a godsend, and people will buy them.
Mm-hmm. I think the big thing here is some people are worried if they're going to be able to sort of get mind share or brand recognition. I don't think that's really going to be a big deal. And for the driver thing, one thing to maybe make you feel a little bit more comfortable is the fact that Intel is a massive company and might be able to shift resources around. Although driver people aren't the same as people who do other software.
Mm-hmm.
So there might be an acclimation period. Whether or not this happens.
Well, ideally, I mean, while you're developing a product, that period should be now.
Mhm.
And it should have been months
Mhm.
leading up to now. Steve's makes a good point. It's not a large population who use UHD to game. UHD being Intel HD graphics or Intel Ultra HD graphics, whatever they're called, and then is going to file a driver report about said game. They kind of expected typical crappy Intel IGP, but once many cards are out in the masses,
He goes on to continues.
they have much more data points to figure out what are driver issues, what are weird edge cases, which specific game engines, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I mean, that's all a fair point. But the thing is what you want to be doing with as a company like Intel is having your driver team working directly with game developers and engine developers like UE and whatever the other big engines are and whatever the big publishers are, and making sure that these cards are QA tested on your card. These games are QA tested on your card. And as far as I can tell, they have been sending out cards to developers. So that's always good news because it means developers get to actually test on real hardware. So hopefully that will mean good things, but it's hard to say. And from what I could tell, the enthusiast community is very, how can I say, skeptical of Intel at best right now for graphics.
Dave asks or mentions that neither AMD nor NVIDIA has managed to launch a new graphics architecture problem free. So why are we expecting this? It's not so much as expecting problem free, it's just catastrophic problems instead of normal driver launch day problems.
Yeah, there are always weird bugs with everything, and I've experienced them from NVIDIA, I've experienced them from AMD, I've experienced them from everybody. But the level of problems you see that exist with Intel's IGP stuff, including the Xe graphics stuff, are much bigger, in my opinion, if you're trying to actually use these things to play games, and they are, how do I put it? They are not being really addressed. They're long-standing issues. So that's why people have this expectation that Intel is not going to be able to deliver a reliable product in the graphics market. I, on the other hand, while I understand those concerns, and obviously I'm going to look at it when they come out, if I get my hands on one or whatever, I'm much more optimistic because I do believe, similar to what Steve said and everything, Intel is definitely going to be trying. They know that they need to make a good first impression with their actual discrete cards. So I think they're going to be pretty good. Whether or not they'll be widely available or the prices will be good is a whole other story, but we'll see when they come. Moving on to our next topic. Crytek has recently unveiled that they are going to be making Crysis 4. We don't know when it will be out or really any details about the game at all, but we do know that the game is coming. So that's pretty cool to me. I love the Crysis series. They've been doing a lot of stuff with the remasters recently. I haven't played. I think there's a Crysis 3 remaster, right? That I haven't got to play yet. Mm-hmm. I obviously finished the original game. I did play somewhat of the Crysis, the Crysis remaster, and it looks good. I just didn't. I didn't finish it because I didn't feel like it was better enough to be playing the game over again when I've already played those. Mm-hmm. But Crysis 3 is probably my favorite in the installment in the lineup, so I probably am going to check that one out at some point. But having a new Crysis is going to be really cool. While we don't know what platforms it's going to be on, I guess we can assume it'll be on PC and like the next gen consoles, which are realistically now the current gen consoles, but we don't know what else to call them. So yeah, the trailer they showed off is basically, I mean, I'll play it here. I don't think I can get this full screen and work properly, but it's really not much here. Just some flashy graphics of like explosions and things crumbling. Kind of cool. Mm-hmm. Could mean there's going to be a lot of physics-based, destruction in the game or something. I don't know. And then at the end, it'll say, join the journey, become the hero in text. It's pretty cool. I'm definitely looking forward to Crysis 4. I don't know how big of a fan you are of the series.
I really enjoyed Crysis 3, and I played Crysis 1 a long time ago. I mean, it'd be good to see the big sort of GPU game come out again, CPU game that crushes systems. I think it would be interesting to see that for a while. People benchmarked Crysis 3 for a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
It stayed in benchmark suites for a really, really long time.
Digital Foundry still uses it till today. Richard Ledbetter, I believe it is. He swears by that game, because it still has certain cases, certain scenes that are very intensive in specific situations that are useful for testing even modern graphics cards.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty interesting launch. I mean, that's one of the games I'm looking forward to, along with the new Stalker.
Nicodemus Stroud. I think I pronounced your name right. I just went with the biblical version. Yeah, imagine what the recommended specs will be for Crysis 4. Yeah, exactly. I'd imagine they're probably not going to be as ridiculous as they were at Crysis 1, because even Crysis 3 had much more reasonable specs for the time it came out. But they should still be pretty high. Or it should definitely be one of those games, like you said, that are going to be, playable years down the road at max settings and still feel like a fairly modern game. Like you could play Crysis 3 right now and it still looks beautiful, remastered or not. In other news, Video Cards reports that BOE, or Beijing Oriental Electronics Group, announced it developed the fastest gaming panel ever, which is a 500 plus hertz 1080p or full HD display with a 1 milliseconds response time and true 8-bit color gamut support. So we will probably sooner rather than later be seeing these, actual 500 hertz gaming monitors in the market, which is pretty interesting to say the least. I mean, I think I've seen 360 hertz and like 400 hertz monitors in both desktop monitors and gaming laptops. And
I haven't seen 400 hertz monitors.
I think at CES they were showing off some 400 hertz panels. I don't know if anyone actually reached the market yet. Maybe I could have dreamed that.
Source, it came to me in a dream.
Source my dreams, yeah, exactly. But obviously, a lot of people are going to be like, "What do you need 500 hertz for?" And the answer is, you don't, but you probably want it. Or if you are somebody who competes, plays competitive games, you're probably going to want as high a refresh rate as you can get. I'm sure there are diminishing returns once you get to these levels, but 480 hertz were announced by NVIDIA. Yeah, that's probably what I was remembering.
Yeah, that was Steez that said that. He said it was at CES. So
yeah.
No, I mean, this looks really, really good. I think this is even more reason for me to do even more testing talking about absurd frame rates so that the audience can yell at me and tell me that 60 hertz gaming is fine.
Yeah, pretty much.
I think that this might be one of the places where this really isn't for everyone. And, there's sort of an issue where people seem to think that if one thing doesn't really do what I want it to do, then it shouldn't exist. But I think this will be really good for a very specific part of the market that is looking forward to stuff like this.
Yeah, I mean,
again, like you
more
said,
developments, more options is always a good thing. Even if it's not for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, Doughboy here says that he doesn't play competitive games. This doesn't do anything for him. And Steez says that getting OLEDs to this frame rate is really what we need. Who cares if it's 500 hertz and the pixel response time? Panel makers say one response time, it really means 5 to 10 milliseconds. That's true. A lot of monitor reviews will blatantly tell you that, but as time goes on, you get better and better panels.
This is one of the reasons why overdrive exists, but that doesn't always work to the benefit of the end user, or at least doesn't always do what it says it's going to do. But yeah, I mean, the sooner we can get OLED or something comparable, I mean, there's different problems with OLED, obviously, but the sooner we can get panel technologies that can actually do that at, and actually switch pixels at a much faster rate, so you don't get smearing and ghosting and other artifacts like that, the better.
Yeah, I mean, the truth here is it really depends on who's looking to buy this thing, and for a very large majority of the market, they're not going to care.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Again, they're not going to make enough of these monitors to supply a majority of the market anyways. Like, I was on a waiting list for a long time to try to get my hands on a 240 hertz 1440p panel from like 3 different brands because it had the panel that I wanted. And I had so much trouble, I eventually just bought an Acer Predator, which was pretty much everything I wanted. Vitor Moreno says that the human eye can't track that fast in the center, the focus. I mean, the speed that the human eye can track, like, it really depends about the cones and the rods, which, again, maybe this is a video we should touch on at some point.
The only thing I would say is human eyes don't see in refresh rate, like in hertz or FPS. It's a lot more complicated than that, and where the benefits can be doesn't necessarily need to be on the focus point. It could be on the peripheral, where you can actually be able to tell that something is in motion on your peripheral vision, which can be helpful again because the whole point about competitive games is being able to react faster and see things that are coming at you, coming from one edge of the screen to the other quicker or whatever. This is a topic that I can't really get into detail on a live stream, but the point is that it is reductive at best to say just simply, well, the human eye can't see that fast anyway, so there's no point. But there's a lot of other factors.
Steve here says that the human eye is analog and hard to compare with digital. I mean,
Absolutely.
that's absolutely the truth. And he also said that we need to set targets anyways. It doesn't have to be OLED. Look at where IPS panels have gone. They used to be known for super slow response times and are basically as competitive as any other panel type.
Absolutely.
I agree with that.
And the thing is these same companies that are trying to develop the fastest response or refresh rate monitor are also working on, very niche, experimental technology in doing those other things too. Don't think panel manufacturers don't want to also solve those problems themselves, because the first one that does gets to sell a lot of panels to everybody. So
yeah, I mean, Tim from Hardware Unbox, gives it a glowing review, and suddenly you can't buy the panel anywhere.
Absolutely.
Steve said the KM Tech Supplies is that we need CPUs to drive those frame rates too. You would actually be surprised.
For the most part, we have them. I mean, depending on the game, when you look at some of the modern CPUs, even going back to the, as far back as the 3000 series from AMD, and obviously the Intel 10th gen on up, a lot of games can push well into 400 FPS plus.
I wish I
if
could,
you have the graphics card that can do it, or
I wish I could upload a graph that I have here somewhere, but I mean, I was able to push a lot of games to absurd frame rates. Like in Rainbow Six, I was able to push 500 to 600 FPS with a 5600X.
Yeah.
And then we have something from Underscore Man, with a blacked out avatar.
The human eye will always track X amount behind the closest input. If your monitor is faster, you will respond that much faster. Yeah, I mean, that's a good way to just summarize it, I think.
Which, I mean, listen, if you're going to play like Crusader Kings, you do not need a 500 hertz monitor. This is just not something that does anything for you. If you like to play single player games, probably pushing that frame rate is not really necessary. I am happy getting over 100 FPS in most single player games. It's the multiplayer twitchy games where I really enjoy having the higher refresh rate.
So in terms of regular gaming, they're actually Digital Foundry, specifically, I think Alex, is his last name Bottega?
I think it's something like that, yeah.
A while back, I watched a video from him. It was quite a while ago, so I don't remember the details, but he was explaining how higher and higher refresh rates can help with the actual experience in a game in terms of the visual experience, because it can help with things like aliasing or something like that. He explained how and why. I just don't remember because I didn't prep it for this video. But
I mean, if you can get both high graphic settings and a really high frame rate, that's ideal. I just think in the if you have to pick one or the other, the frame rate is a lot nicer in twitchier situations where your adrenaline's pumping, you're really paying attention to everything. You're wondering if any bush has a person in it, if that couch has a guy behind it. You're kind of on a different mental level. But if you're just playing Breath of the Wild, you're not in that same sort of tense mindset.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ryan Parker says Linus did a test with Shroud at. We both clicked
on it. Yeah.
40 hertz. The most interesting thing was that Paul actually saw the biggest difference going up in the refresh rates. Paul from Paul's Hardware, not the professionals, not the pro Overwatch player, not Shroud. It was the guy who sits on his couch and is put in a situation like this. That might have to do with muscle memory and those guys being used to using lower refresh rate panels. And Paul really, really benefited from more information to sort of fill his brain with.
Yeah, that's so the thing about competitive gamers is they get used to the situation that they play in, meaning the exact response times and everything that they're used to with the hardware they use. So any change to that can affect the way they play until they get used to the new thing. Whereas somebody like Paul, who is more of a lay gamer, to say, or casual gamer, I guess I would say, is probably not as used to any particular circumstance, so might be able to adapt to the new thing that's better faster. That's my
It's also a
non-scientific
lot more
analysis.
responsive, so it gives you more feedback immediately.
Yeah.
The brain sees things faster on adrenaline. Vitor Moreno says, "I absolutely know that I feel that when I would play games at a competitive level. Playing
Anybody
Tarkov."
ever noticed that if you were gaming and you're in a match and you suddenly need to pee and you don't immediately go pee and you finish your round, that you feel like you're more focused somehow, even though you need to pee? It's the weirdest thing. I've heard this from multiple people, and I've experienced it myself. But sometimes you're just like, my reactions are super quick because I want to hurry up and go piss. Like, it's crazy. I don't know.
I mean, but yeah, no, in general, I've had some pretty intense matches and then felt like I needed to go lie down, like I just fought somebody.
Uh,
It's
yeah, I've definitely had post game fatigue. It's weird. You don't really feel like you're doing much, but you do afterward.
well, you're mentally focusing very hard compared to what you're doing the rest of your day. Um, if you guys have ever almost been in a car accident and you swerved out of the way and then you were amped the rest of the day, it's kind of like that because you're putting yourself in a different state. So
I
again,
lived
a lot
in uh, I lived in Chicago before here, where I live now in Houston, and I can tell you that I've almost been in a car accident almost every day on the road because of how crazy drivers are there. So yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
but yeah, a lot of this stuff comes down to, and it's really important to understand this, the individual person. So it's not so much numbers on a page as much as so what benefits you, whether that be 60 hertz, whether that be 120, whether that be 140, or any number in between there and 500. It's kind of a you thing, because some people say that they can't see the difference between 4K and 1440p. But some people will swear that there's absolutely a major difference. So I really
Oh,
think it depends
I
on.
will just comment on that from my own experience, and I'll say that it does depend on the game for me, because if I'm doing is increasing the resolution to 4K from 1440p and there is no increase in asset quality, I
Mhm.
probably won't know the difference. Like,
Yeah.
I might be able to spot the difference in the sense that I'll see the changes in the UI or something, but I won't actually have a better experience visually, because all I'm doing is scaling up the same too low of resolution assets. Uh, so asset quality is probably way more important than just spatial resolution on its own.
Um, KM Tech Supplies says that I think people don't realize that if your eyes do have a frame limit on it, it's not in sync with your monitor. The faster monitor FPS will increase the sample rate. I mean, that's a way of putting it again, but the rods and the cones work differently than what.
Rods and the cones.
The important thing to understand is, if I remember this correctly, you only get like 3 to 4 very detailed images a second. But you can see movement incredibly well, which in a shooter or in a multiplayer game is very important because you generally identify people by movement. Um, let's see. We have another one here. I can only go an hour to an hour to an hour and a half playing the Division 2. My eyes get tired and I get killed. I mean, yeah, and I noticed that the ability for me to like play hard is not as much as it used to be when I was younger, and it really depends on what I ate that day and how stressful my day was before that.
Diet can definitely play a large role in the amount of energy you have to do just about anything, or how excited you feel about something, even your mood.
If you eat salmon, man, it's that's like an overclock for your whole body.
It's fucking salmon. That's why they swim upstream. They're jacked up on whatever is in them. Well, I guess we'll move on to our final topic of the night before we do some Q&A and stuff, even though we've already been engaging with the chat. NVIDIA is going to walk away, is reportedly going to walk away with their, sorry, not with their, from their, why is this not working? Okay, sorry guys, my screen share went away. I will fix that now. Did I just share two things? What's going on with this?
Yes, you did.
Everything's breaking. Everything's broken.
Let's see.
I shared my whole screen by mistake. I'm retarded. Sorry. Yeah, NVIDIA is going to walk away, is reportedly going to walk away from their acquisition for ARM. Apparently, it's being reported by Bloomberg that they don't think it's going to actually be approved by lawmakers or regulatory bodies. So they are going to just pull out of their $40 billion deal to purchase ARM. I think this is actually going to cost them some money. I think there's a penalty of around, it might be reported here, but I read it earlier in one of these reports on it. Not reported here, but I think it's somewhere over, it's like $1.5 billion, last I checked, that they'll be losing by pulling out of this deal, which is a pretty big deal. But I think overall, this is a good thing for everybody because I don't think anybody was necessarily sold on the idea that NVIDIA should be owning ARM. ARM is a big part of the industry in terms of how many users they actually affect, because so many of the products we use ARM technology, and so many companies license ARM processing cores for use in their own designs. And because of that, when you have a company like NVIDIA that would be in control of them, even though I'm not necessarily saying they would do something very shady in the sense that they would start revoking licenses for Samsung or AMD or Apple, I don't think they would do that. There is always the threat of them behaving in some sort of anti-competitive way that could affect everybody negatively, especially the smartphone market and the enterprise market, where ARM is starting to break out even more. Any thoughts, Alex?
I mean, I honestly think it's good for the market that they're not going to be, sort of working together. I think a lot of the talks about antitrust stuff are fair, since ARM really is, like you said, a very integral part of the market. And even if this doesn't happen in the short term, there might be something that happens in the long term.
Definitely.
I mean, I don't really have a lot of opinions beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much more of an opinion to really have on the subject aside from, I think everyone is pretty happy to hear that this is the case. Obviously, it's not official yet, but it seems like that's going to be the case. And that pretty much covers it for all of our news topics for the night. We are now going to get into some Q&A with the chat. I should also take this time to point out, which I should have done earlier, but it slipped my mind. We are now live on Twitch. We actually have a Twitch channel now set up for specifically for the podcast. It's going to be twitch.tv/adoredtech. So if for some reason you don't want to watch us on YouTube, you can watch us there.
So we have a statement here talking about cheaper from Metallic Blade, saying, "I'll believe that when flagship consumer cards are priced around 700 MSRP again, like they once were." I don't think we're ever going to see that again. I
mean,
think there have to be some major changes in the market for that to be a thing.
I mean, even if we do see that at some point, the fact of the matter is right now it does seem like prices are starting to come down across the board compared to what they were a few months ago. That doesn't mean they will stay that way. They could tick up again. I mean, if we look back at that chart that I had earlier from 3D Center, I will pull it up again, actually.
Worldtown 2.0 says the Great Depression 2.0 could make that happen. I mean, the problem with that is how complicated our supply chain is. I wouldn't be shocked if it were that bad. Some of these companies that make mission critical stuff just go belly up.
Yeah. Now, going back to the pricing thing, I did pull up the chart for us all to see it once again. You can see that the dip in pricing that we're seeing right now, or at least the German market is seeing, but I think it can be observed elsewhere as well, is definitely does definitely correlate with the recent drop in Ethereum pricing. And so like those things are definitely correlated. If Ethereum jumps back up again and continues to keep going up, yeah, most likely graphics card pricing is not going to stabilize and keep going down. It's going to be worse at some point during the year. Though, if AMD cards specifically are even cheaper here on this chart than NVIDIA, and the main reason for that is that they are not as sought after by miners, because unlike NVIDIA, who does an LHR through software, and it gets bypassed some way or another, the RDNA 2 cards are designed from the ground up to not actually be that good at mining compared to their predecessors, because they use, and that might not necessarily be in AMD's intent, but it is what happens when you reduce the memory bandwidth of a graphics card in the way that they did and supplement that with an increased cache, which helps a lot in gaming. It alleviates that bandwidth bottleneck there, but it does not help in Ethereum mining, at least not in the same way.
Well, and so these cards weren't built to be compute monster, powerhouses like the Vegas stuff was.
Yes, so that's why you see that you can buy Radeon cards on the market right now, even at places like Newegg, where for the most part, if they have NVIDIA stock, they're only selling them in the shuffle, but they will have direct live add to cart buttons for Radeon cards. That's a big deal to me. That shows that there's inventory at least sitting around more. It's not just gamer demand that's buying them. I mean, it pretty much is just gamer demand buying them as they want to. The thing is that Radeon cards also don't have the same mind share as NVIDIA cards. People will pay more for an NVIDIA card, even a gamer, than they will for a Radeon card. So if the Radeon cards continue to exist in the market at these prices and they just sit on shelves, they're going to start dipping in price more and more too. And that will help bring down the overall cost of the graphics card market, even if Ethereum stays relatively up. So that's one way to look at it.
Which I wouldn't be shocked if Ethereum just doesn't go up again. So Nicodemus here says that he guesses that he'll be stuck on a 20 series for some time because he refuses to pay these scalping prices. I mean, a 20 series card is not bad. You can still play pretty much everything.
There's nothing,
whatever resolution you're on. I mean, if you're at 1440p on everything on a 2060 and everything above that, you're probably fine.
Everything in the 20 series pretty much performs well enough that, like, what are you really going to have an issue with at this point? I wouldn't be worried about it if I had a 20 series card and I couldn't buy something better from the 30 or series or the 6000 series.
So Ryan here says we will see the parts dip back down from this earlier comment. Computer parts were crazy in the 80s and then it crashed. Halt and catch fire. Well, here's the problem with that statement. The level of complexity of design was not as high as it was before, and integrated circuits were not as embedded into our society as much as they are now. So again, here's the problem. People could make computer parts relatively easily, and a lot of people soldered stuff in their backyards. We're not at that point anymore where you can have some backyard building to make, a relatively powerful system. The cost of manufacturing and the complexity of it is not something you could hire 20 people and figure out how to get an assembly line going in a month or two. So I don't know. If demand goes down a lot, then yes, these things will get cheaper, but I don't see demand crashing.
I mean, probably not. There's still a lot of pent-up demand from people who've been wanting to buy a graphics card and couldn't all this time.
And I feel like if it's going to get that bad, there's going to be some pretty large societal problems where your graphics card being cheap is probably the least biggest problem you have.
Although I will say it kind of surprises me because I'm in a lot of different gaming communities. I have a lot of friends who game on PC and stuff, and I don't really see anybody, beating down Newegg's door, so to speak, to go and buy an RX 6600 at 450. Even though a lot of these people have been saying they want to buy a graphics card, these are people who typically buy in the $400 and $500 price category, and they don't want to buy one of those, even though it delivers very good performance for that dollar. It's not better than what we had a couple of years ago at that same price point, but it is better than what we had for the past 12 months at that price point. And so if you really are frustrated and really want a graphics card, you should be considering buying that one. I'm not trying to say everyone should be spending $500 on a graphics card. No, but if you're typically someone who buys in that price category and you don't have something as good as the 6600, you should strongly consider it. I think most viewers of this channel would, but the problem is there's so many people who only buy NVIDIA and they don't want to take a chance on a Radeon card, even though, I mean, the RX 6000 series is the best thing AMD has released in a long time. Driver-wise, it's very good. I daily drive a 6800 XT. I've never had really any issues compared to what I've had with the 5700 XT or, even the RX 580, 480. Because as a reviewer, I've had to use these cards. And unlike most reviewers, I will take, a product that I would typically recommend to users and actually daily drive it for a while, even though during the 580 and 480 era, I was personally using NVIDIA, and I would typically personally use NVIDIA in my systems. I would take out my NVIDIA card, put in a 480, a 580, whatever it is, and use that for weeks or months just to know how bad is the driver experience, how much is this affecting me and my ability to play. So when I recommend this product, I don't feel like shit doing it. And yeah, I mean, I would definitely see problems here and there, but nothing that I would say is like, for me, it was nothing that was breaking to the point where I would say, don't buy this thing at all. You can't play on this, or it's too much aggravation to be using a Radeon card instead of an NVIDIA one. That doesn't mean you should only buy Radeon. I never made that statement ever. I usually, most of my reviews is, here's all the information you need, make the choice you want. But for the most part, even the 5700 XT, I think, was stable enough to daily drive. But I have heard of some mixed feedback from other users on that where they had experiences that I didn't necessarily have, even though I did have some driver issues. But in the case of the 6800 XT, that is my daily driver card. It is the one I personally use. I don't even have any Ampere cards right now because nobody sent me one. I have used an Ampere card. I used a 3070 daily until I sold it to buy this one. Those were cards I personally bought. But from a which is the best perspective, I think it's pretty much a draw, and it just depends on what features you want or what's most important to you. DLSS is a very nice feature.
I wanted the raw performance, and I wanted something that was faster at 1080p for graphics card for CPU benchmarks. So I got a 6800 XT, and I absolutely love this thing.
I went from the 3070 to this because I wanted the 16 gigs of VRAM, and like you said,
it makes a difference.
For me, the raw performance was more important than things like ray tracing or DLSS.
So we have a question from NBW Doughboy, which is it just me, or does 30 FPS on PC feel a lot worse than 30 FPS on console? When I go back and play PS3 games at 30 FPS, I notice it, but not as bad when I try 30 FPS locked on PC. Could be the display you're using.
Is it just me, or is 30 FPS on PC? So the first thing I would say is, are you using the same input method? If you're using a controller on console and a keyboard and mouse on PC, 30 FPS is ridiculously bad with a keyboard and mouse because you're moving your mouse cursor faster and therefore you're expecting a faster response time. Whereas just the native input latency in using a joystick and then on top of that using a wireless controller, which most people who play on console are, is going to kind of all play in together with that lower that lower FPS, where you don't notice it much and you're willing to, or you're able to adjust to it. But I could never play a 30 FPS game with a keyboard and mouse. I can do it with a controller. It's harder for me, but I can still adjust to it. Like I played through Spider-Man PS4 on the PS4 at 30 FPS. After about an hour, it didn't bother me anymore.
So it really depends. I think a part of it too is if you're playing a game you've played before on console, it kind of doesn't bother you. The types of games you're playing. The only game that's an older game that I have trouble playing is Ocarina of Time because it runs at like 20 FPS on the 64. But pretty much everything that's an older game that's 30 FPS doesn't bother me. So again, too, there's different kind of expectations you're having. So, if you're playing like the Uncharted games that you really remember enjoying back in the day, it's probably a part of that too.
Yeah, it could be. Let's see.
Metallic Blade had this one that he's going to stick along with his GTX 1080 because of what was said by another user, but it is showing its struggles sometimes on some of the more recent games trying to run them out maxed out at 1440p. I mean, yeah, those cards are really going to show their age at max out settings. Again, though, so personally for me, I generally, and this is if I was buying the card with my own money, not getting sent review samples or whatever, or needing to buy a card because this is my benchmarking card, I would go about 3 to 4 years before buying a graphics card. Unless somebody had a trade offer, I could, sort of get in at a good deal. I would usually wait like 2 product cycles. The weird thing with the 10 series is the 20 series wasn't a whole lot better because of all the ray tracing stuff. So it's kind of like a half step. But I absolutely understand how these cards can show their age. You can get a little bit more miles from them, though, if you're willing to cut down on some settings. Especially if you don't have the assumption that you're going to walk in with max settings on every game and just kill them.
Ryan Parker said, I want a card that outperforms a PS5 and a comparable price. Lots of users want a PS5 at a price because it's very hard to buy one of those. To that, I would say, I mean, it kind of depends on what you mean by outperform a PS5, because I think if you're looking to outperform it at 4K, yeah, that's not going to happen. Because the PS5 just has more VRAM available to it than any card you're going to buy in that $500, $400 price range. An RX 6600 will probably be faster than a PS5 at 1080p, 1440p in terms of frame rate, or deliver a better experience, but the PS5 is probably going to be nicer at 4K 60-ish or whatever. So because the RX 6600 just doesn't have the memory subsystem and memory capacity to be a reliable 4K card.
So I think we also need to sort of cut into the idea that, well, Sony is selling this thing that's more powerful than a graphics card at this price. Why? A lot of this has to do that these companies have a set number of pricing for the hardware that they're buying and the memory, and all of this stuff is sort of a set unit, and they're also buying in much larger droves than anybody else, and they're willing to take a loss. An earlier commenter said something like, so what does that mean? Sony is not taking a loss? Yeah, they are. Sony is absolutely taking a loss. Microsoft is very
I've
likely.
seen people talk about the Xbox Series S and say, well, how is it possible that they can sell that card, that whole console with storage, a processor, a graphics card, and the board, and everything that cooling, everything that goes along with that console for $299, but the 6500 XT is, as expensive, or around that price. It's $270 on average, right? And the answer is that Microsoft is able to sell that thing at less money. Like they're able to eat some of the costs, or they could sell at cost, razor thin margin, or no margin at all, or even, like Alex said, at a complete loss, and not care, because what they're selling those consoles for is to get you to buy software that they make money on. Whether
It's
that's
important.
with a direct game sale for the console or through a subscription like Game Pass, which they probably prefer.
You aren't buying games from Asus or MSI or XFX or EVGA.
I mean, Valve is going to be doing it right now with the Steam Deck. They're selling a portable gaming system for $399, where everybody else that's in the portable gaming, PC market, smaller companies like Aya for the AO Neo, and there's some other ones, GPD, and there's something called the X Player, I think, or something like that. Either way, those PCs cost like $800 plus, even though for the most part they're going to deliver similar performance, if not worse performance, than the Steam Deck, because Valve is willing to take a loss on that hardware, and can mass produce as well. And they don't care, because when you're using a Steam Deck, you're buying games on Steam majoritarily, and they get a 30% cut of everything. And that's perfectly fine for them.
I mean, so every time you buy just about anything for Sony or Microsoft, whether it be branded controllers, games, whatever, they get a cut out of it. So this has been the console game for a long time. Just more recently, they were trying to make money. And you also didn't have the kind of demand that we're dealing with right now. Demand is insane everywhere.
Also, I mean, this is the fact of the matter. Console hardware cannot be used for mining, at least not easily.
Yeah.
And so its prices are not going to be directly impacted by that. It'll be indirectly impacted because of silicon shortages, shipping, all that stuff, but it won't be directly impacted by that. Whereas every gaming graphics card, for the most part, is capable of Ethereum mining. So somebody who is capable of making money with that purchase is going to be willing to spend more for it than somebody who's just playing a game because it's a recreational activity. And so that's just the reality of the situation we're in. Is mining the only factor in why prices are high? No, but it is a major factor. And that's something you have to take into consideration whenever you're comparing a graphics card to another gaming device, like a console.
I mean, the other thing that's important to understand too is you cannot overclock an Xbox. You can't do any of the enthusiast stuff that you want to these consoles, so they can be built to bare minimum spec. There's also a little bit more money that goes into Asus or MSI or whatever have you, because their users will do things that are not intended.
And if you had more to that point, then go ahead. But if not, I have another comment I wanted to highlight. Okay.
I mean, that's pretty much it. I mean, there's other features that these things have, more display ports on them, more, different sort of more exotic cooling options. If you've ever opened up a console compared to doing any sort of taking apart a high-end motherboard or graphics card, you can see that they put more time and effort in our computer components than they do in an Xbox.
I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. At least I've seen some pretty interesting engineering from coming out of Microsoft in terms of how they put together those the Series X and the Series S, even though you could definitely see where they cost down on stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The Series X, on the other hand, I mean, it's a pretty marvelous design, really. Just from a design perspective.
Microzone says that the cost, he said earlier something about the cost of the AMD CPUs and GPUs they're selling to Sony. He said that it is actually $134. So it's not just the GPU and the CPU that's in there that costs a ton of money. It's
the VRAM. I mean,
it's the VRAM.
16 gigs of VRAM is going to cost a lot of money. The
It-
storage is not
yep.
cheap.
Mhm.
Let's see. This is a different cut topic, kind of. But Chris Young asked, "Is RDNA 3 a complete redesign?" So, from the latest rumors I've been reading about RDNA 3, I could say that it seems like they plan to go chiplet based on there. So, exactly how, I don't know. But so chiplets meaning that they will have a one chiplet that has actual GPU cores in there, and then for the Infinity cache, which they will be maintaining, instead of it being on die, there will be an additional 3D V-cache chiplet that is Infinity cache. That is what I've been seeing from the latest rumors. Could be inaccurate, I don't know, but it would make sense based on their patent for chip stacking that I've seen recently. I'm sure everyone has. And then on top of that, they might have things like machine learning cores that is a specific die that also they stack on top and things like that. So in terms of complete redesign, I would say the actual cores themselves are probably going to be designed very similar to RDNA 2. There might be some changes or optimizations in that the core pipeline, but I don't expect the ALUs to be very different. It's still going to be RDNA and what fundamentally makes RDNA RDNA. But the packaging is probably what's going to be the biggest difference, and so they can increase the overall number of cores and the flexibility of SKUs and stuff like that. And that's the best I've got so far. But I mean, we don't really know a lot.
So Don actually points out that when he's talking about the consoles, he said earlier, I wouldn't say consoles are built to bare minimum spec. The PS5 uses bare metal, liquid metal, for instance.
Yeah.
Jaguar maybe was bare minimum, but that's Jaguar. So I haven't personally opened up a console of this generation. So maybe, again, this might be a little bit of my own.
There are teardowns available.
I haven't really looked at teardowns, but my experience with everything from the PS2 to the Xbox, PS3, the PS4, those things were built very, very, very low end.
Josh W said, next gen consoles with Zen 4 or Zen 5? Next gen consoles should be so far out that I don't even know if Zen will even be relevant by then, to be completely honest with you. And I mean, at that point, maybe there'll be so many advances in the way ARM processors are that they'll be using an ARM chip. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, because in consoles, the power envelope is really important. Yeah, they're always worried about heat and trying to keep costs down. So maybe ARM would be the option. What do we have here?
NBW Doughboy said, what is the lowest nanometer they can get to? Will we hit diminishing returns or no more upgrade paths soon? Well, I can say that from Intel's own roadmap, which if you want to trust Intel, they will rather soon stop measuring in nanometer because they're going to be getting beneath nanometer, at least by their measuring, however they measure it, into, I think, 20. What is 20A again? And let me look this up so I don't sound like an idiot.
Well, there's this talk of or the rumors of silicon being at its limits were very much over exaggerated. As we get closer and closer to that number, we can push out a little bit more. Whether or not the numbers that we get will be massive is kind of up in the air.
Yeah, so 20A stands for 20 angstrom, and that is how Intel is going to be measuring in the future. And I would imagine others will probably follow suit because whatever Intel is doing, you kind of have to match it at in some respects.
So I feel like we kind of have to get into this now because we brought up the size thing. None of these companies, the nanometer size thing doesn't actually mean the largest or the smallest thing on the processor is that many nanometers apart. It kind of just varies by the different fabrication plants and sort of what they define that as.
I mean, at this point, it's marketing. The size differences are just marketing to let you know that they are. This one was better than that one, but 7 nanometer and 6 nanometer are not.
Yeah, I was. Ian Cuttress talked about this a couple years ago.
I mean, just looking at this is Intel's naming scheme that they announced not too long ago. They basically have changed the name of one of their 10 nanometer nodes to Intel 7, which is essentially 7 nanometer, right? And the reason why they did that is to align what they consider a comparable node to other 7 nanometer nodes in terms of size, performance, power efficiency, etc., with the naming that TSMC, Samsung were using, because TSMC and Samsung decided to start using names that didn't really make a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
So Intel's doing the same thing. That doesn't mean that Intel was 100% accurate before, but they were more accurate before.
Josh down here says that isn't Intel's node more condensed? Well, that's why their 10 nanometer was just as good as TSMC's 7 nanometer.
More or less.
But yeah, so it's kind of hard to really judge these things independently of one another. It's more or less just kind of round numbers for marketing. Not even round numbers, but just rounding the numbers for marketing so that you can have an idea that this company is about in line with this other company.
Yeah, pretty
much.
So
a lot of people got really mad, and Vitor is mentioning this, when they changed the node 10 nanometer node to Intel 7. I know a lot of people don't like Intel, so it's going to be very easy to kind of clown on them, but the node is roughly on par with TSMC 7. So they just changed it to...
Steve's pointed out their 10 nanometer had multiple iterations. Their current enhanced superfin 10 nanometer is down until 7. Yes. And since, by their own metrics, and I think it's fair to say, their 10 nanometer superfin is performant on par with TSMC's 7 nanometer. It makes sense from a business standpoint when they're trying to sell that node to another company when they're doing semi-custom work, that they use a similar naming scheme. So that was the driving force behind them changing their names. They're just meeting the rest of the industry where it's at, because they were the last to do it.
You need to understand, to a certain point, everything comes down to, even in the business-to-business level, some guy walking into a store and saying, but his number is bigger.
Look at the first iteration of 10 nanometer. It clocked like garbage and couldn't go past like 4 cores. I mean, Intel had tons of issues with their 10 nanometer node.
That was Ice Lake, wasn't
it? Quite a long time. Cannon Lake?
Lake. Some kind of a lake.
And so, I mean, you can't really... obviously, the earlier node wasn't very good. They weren't selling it to anybody, to be fair. They weren't even really releasing products on it themselves. So now they are, and they're now that they want to be competitive with TSMC in that space, they need a product that makes sense in terms of naming.
So we have a comment from Mike Brazone, who's always a pleasure to have in the chat. He's usually got some pretty detailed information. Intel SF 10/7 costs the same as TSMC 7, to which Steve's replied to him and saying, to whom? Because Intel doesn't need to buy from Intel. Well, correct me if I'm wrong here. Intel is starting to push out the semi-custom work to other companies. So when Intel was selling only a product to other people, and they were only using their fabs for themselves, they could put whatever number they wanted on there, because it doesn't really matter to sort of put a number on a page, unless it's just for marketing for the processor itself. This is more to help with the semi-custom work with other companies that they work with to say, hey, we have 7 too.
Then I mean, so in terms of like it costs the same, I don't know about that. Probably, but the thing is from my understanding with these fabs and semi-custom work is that what they charge kind of depends on the customer, because they have I have heard from reliable people that TSMC will charge vastly different prices for their 7 nanometer node capacity on a customer by customer basis, on a project by project basis, just based on relationship, timing, and various things. So at any given time, we don't know exactly how much anything costs because they don't tell us, but at any given time, what you pay for an Intel 7 nanometer production run, a TSMC 7 nanometer production run could be wildly different.
So we have a comment here from NBW Doughboy asking about 8K gaming. From the Linus video, the 3090 could do 8K at 60 FPS in some cherry-picked games and at cherry-picked titles still, but that's pretty impressive. Will the next generation finally be there?
Maybe. From what we understand about, I think the next generation Intel thing is Loveless, right? Or is it Hopper? Anyway, from what we understand in terms of some of the leaks that I've seen circulating about AMD's next thing after Ampere, not even NVIDIA's next thing after Ampere, is that they're going to have even more compute units or CUDA cores than even now, which is already a lot. Now, whether or not that actually translates into much more raw performance, because as we know, there's kind of a disconnect there between the number of CUDA cores versus Turing and the actual gaming performance. Hopefully they'll address that through whatever changes need to be done. I'm not sure exactly what that is, but it's possible. I'd say, is it probable? I don't think so, but it's definitely possible that at least at the very high end, 8K gaming at 60 FPS will be something you can do by next generation, if you can actually buy a card for a price that costs less than a house.
So Josh once again asks, I only don't like Intel for its shocking 11th gen, and I think it was the old Intel CEO. I remember an Adored TV video talking about the staff pyramid scheme in Intel and the conditions. I'm not sure in specific which video this was, whether this was about Morthy, which was like a year or two ago, who now doesn't work for the company, or the old stuff that they did, the anti-competitive stuff they did back in the early 2000s.
To that, I would say I'm not in the habit of necessarily siding with giant corporations, from whether it's AMD, Intel, or NVIDIA. Although I do tend to defend each and every one of them in certain circumstances, and I will judge them all on a case-by-case basis, because that's the only way I could be fair. And from the looks of it, I think Intel is definitely doing a lot better in terms of how they do business under Pat Gelsinger than they have in the past. That doesn't mean they won't make any mistakes. That doesn't mean that I trust them 100%. I would just say, you should always buy a product based on what's best for you and the price and all of that stuff, and not worry too much about which company is behaving the best, because at the end of the day, they all behave pretty shittily.
So we have a question here from Ryan asking our thoughts about the Ohio plant for Intel.
Yeah, I think we talked about that last week, but I'm definitely willing to get into it a little bit now.
I think it's good news.
It's good news, but like I said, by the time it actually comes online and stuff, it's not really going to help us in our current situation of, supply issues. The reason why I think it's good news is the more manufacturing that's done here for semiconductors in the US, the better, because as we can tell from the global situation that we're having with the pandemic and everything, supply chains can get disrupted really quickly when you have things going on boats from country to country where situations are not very stable. So
just-in-time supply manufacturing with all of these components that you need to make your product, being literally only having enough supply for like 3 days of work, I think we're starting to see the cracks in that idea when literally anything happens to slow stuff down. one ship clogging up the Suez Canal for 3 days had some pretty knock-on effects in Europe. It's one boat in one waterway.
And I mean, to that,
God
and
forbid, something really bad happened.
yeah. So, in my opinion, these companies need to manufacture even more in the U.S., but not just in the U.S. In the West as a whole, because the Western markets are the largest markets in terms of economies for sure. I realize China and India are huge markets, but there's more complications in terms of economic factors there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I would definitely like to see more manufacturing in the U.S., even in Mexico,
Mm-hmm.
in places like the UK, and so on.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely. And even, the European market is a pretty big
Mhm.
market itself. We're pretty America centric, but the UK takes a pretty good, or the Europe in general takes a pretty large chunk of that. And the fact that there's not really any sort of production there is probably not a good thing. Just
yeah,
in terms of logistics, forget about the whole political conversation or the job stuff or any of that. This is more just a ability to feed the market. So Josh says that the i5 11-12-400F is the best CPU currently.
I like that you added the 11 in there too. 11, 12, 400F. You know, weird thing, it didn't sound any longer than their normal names.
See, I'm getting it wrong, and you're like, yeah, it's about right.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that statement. The i5 12400F is a very good CPU in terms of gaming performance and overall productivity performance and pricing. I think the only thing holding it back a little bit might be motherboard costs, but they're not that much higher for B660 than something like a B550 motherboard.
I actually saw at Best Buy today picking up this webcam that they had the board that I actually have over here. They had an Asus Tough Gaming Z570 just sitting on the shelf. So, and that wasn't insane.
Mhm.
It was like
I
$200
think
or
I
something.
think you can get a B660 motherboard for about $140 for like the kind of the bottom of the barrel motherboards.
Mhm.
These are from like Asus and such, and that's a decent price to pay for a motherboard, I think. The closer you get to $100, the better usually, but $140 is perfectly reasonable. And
Mhm.
you pair that with i5 12400F, which is $180, I think, on average,
Mhm.
or maybe at minimum. Yeah, but yeah, around there. That's really good gaming performance. I think in gaming alone, the 5600X is still up to about 10% faster on average. But of course, it also costs quite a bit more. Um, Technically, you could probably get a bit of a cheaper motherboard to offset some of that cost. But I still think it's probably most reasonable if you're building something new completely to go with the i5 1200F over the 5600X, all things being equal. And that's mostly because with the i5 1200F, you can upgrade to, I guess, 13th gen, maybe until we'll call it 14th gen. I don't know. Whereas if you're buying a 5600X, your only upgrade path is another 5000 series CPU.
So, Josh said that Intel, AMD, and NVIDIA, I could never trust any of these not to take sides either. They have all done scummy tactics. They're businesses. They're multi-million-dollar, multinational companies. They're going to do what makes them money. So, there was a time where I would say I was very much supportive of AMD, and to a certain point, I still want to see AMD succeed. But they're all companies. And we have a comment here from Lockdown, which is, "You are right, guys. We need more independent regional solutions for electronics and manufacturing. Having everything in the Asian continent is a big problem." Well, the other thing too is the tensions that's going on in Taiwan, without really getting involved into the weeds. It's casts a lot of uncertainty, and I think that's why some of these companies are trying to push plants over here. There's no reason 80% of the chip manufacturing, I think it is, comes from one island. One island that is in a very questionable part of the world. in terms of stability. So Mike says the first thing Intel Legal will do is hire up all the new Albany plaintiffs' attorneys to block construction site environmental issues and quash imminent domain citizen suits in that neighborhood. I mean, that's very likely what they're going to do. Steez asked if I said Z570. No, it's Z590 for most of them.
Z590 is last generation.
I don't even know if there's a number like that anymore.
What? Z690 is
690. Yeah, I don't even know if they even do 670 anymore or anything like that.
H670. B660, H670, Z690.
Yeah, so everything's just under the 90 thing. 12400 plus BLK overclock, and you have the best you can get. So I don't have a 12400, and I'm probably just going to do the numbers that I have for the 12600. But the BCLK overclocking looks really interesting. It looks really interesting for that.
Mm-hmm. Jerry Watson said, Micro Center has the Ryzen 5600X for $240 now. Yeah, I mean, and at that price, especially if they have like a motherboard bundle thing where they give you like another $20 off or something, it could still be a pretty decent buy. But generally,
consider it, honestly.
Generally, though, I think the 12400F is probably still going to be get the edge for me on recommendation wise. But I'm not totally against somebody buying a Ryzen 5000 series CPU today. And obviously, if you already have a Ryzen compatible motherboard, go for the Ryzen 5000 series. The extra performance you're going to get from Alder Lake, if you do at all, doesn't make a lot of sense if you also have to buy a whole new platform if you don't need to with the Ryzen. That's,
When Ethereum moves to proof of stake, possibly this summer, it will put a ton of graphics card used for mining on the stake. I wonder if this will impact high GPU prices. This is from M Ice in the chat. So here's kind of the problem I have with the proof of stake thing. Proof of stake was supposed to has been talked about for at least 4 years now. It was supposed to happen last year twice, and it was supposed to happen this year. The start of this month. And then it keeps getting pushed back for whatever reason. So waiting on proof of stake is kind of up in the air to me. Although, yes, it absolutely would impact high GPU prices at some point.
So the question is, though, is there a motive behind the people who would be making that decision to not make the decision now because it will affect Ethereum pricing in a negative way even more, and they obviously don't want that to happen. And I'm not, again, this is a question, it's not me accusing anybody of anything in particular, so much as why are they not doing it? And I think the simple answer is probably going to be that when they do it, it's going to disrupt the Ethereum market in some way or another, and they're worried about that. Which is not, it's reasonable to be worried about you making a change and it affecting the thing, because I don't think the people who are in control of Ethereum or decide its spec want to let it die. Obviously, they want it to thrive. So there's that.
NBW Doughboy says, if you live next to a micro center, then you are truly blessed.
Nice. Yes, it is.
I'm about an hour. If there's no traffic, I'm about an hour away. I'm about an hour and a half most of the time. It's right outside of New York. The one that I have, and it's nice that the option is there. Although I will tell you that driving in that area at any time is not fun. And the money I end up spending on gas, I'd probably end up burning on the savings generally.
So I went from living in Chicago, where my local micro center was about 10 minutes away by car, or less, depending on traffic, to I live in the north suburbs of Houston now, and to go to Houston proper to get to a Micro Center would take me probably around an hour, depending traffic. So I definitely don't go there as often, but I still can if I need to.
Mm-hmm.
But I used to just go to Micro Center like a couple times a week just to check out what graphics card inventory was like and whatnot, and just to buy a random cable or something. Where I can't necessarily do that now. Probably have to use Amazon a lot more often for those kind of purchases.
And lockdown, I don't live in New York. I live in New Jersey, and I got hit by that blizzard, which was fun to shovel my way out of all day yesterday. We got, I think 20 inches or something.
Chris Young asked an interesting question: how much longer till APUs become as powerful as modern GPU? So, I mean, that's kind of it's kind of hard to say because that's an ever-moving goalpost, isn't it? When you say modern, do you mean like an APU, a future APU, as fast as a GPU of today? And to that, I would say I think we're getting ever so closer to that, especially with DDR5 becoming a thing. But I still don't know if we'll ever be in a case where it's just use an APU because there's no real reason to buy a discrete card. But APUs could theoretically overtake that low-end GPU market that seems to be going away. So maybe you'll never need to have a reason to buy a $130 graphics card or $150 graphics card because the IGP on your the IGP on your processor will be just as good.
And it might get to a point where the cost that you have to spend for the GPU, all the costs for the memory and all the other stuff, it kind of gets balanced out. That is just kind of not worth it. Terry 3G says, as someone who went from a 3600X to a 5900X, the 5800X is a great.
The 5600X.
The 5600X is a great BFYP, bang for your buck CPU. 6 cores and 12 threads is ideal for most users. I mean, yeah, so I was always against like sort of side grade stuff. The kinds of people who went from 2500K to a 3570K or so on and so forth, going from an i5 to an i5. But I went from running a 3900X and a 3700X in my primary system, just depending on what I was doing, as I would benchmark with the other different CPUs for different reasons. And I went and I bought a 5800X for my personal system. And I will tell you right now, it is absolutely fantastic for almost all of the tasks I throw at it. The difference you get in gaming performance is fantastic. The times where I felt like my chip was just a little too slow or not good enough, it pushes past that number all the time now.
Proof of Stake, M-Ice, I should say, said Proof of Stake might move the price down short term, but will increase deflation through burning transaction fees. ETH currently staked unlocks over time, I believe, to minimize market shocks? I think he meant market shocks.
I hope so, because I don't know what a carpet shock is.
On that, I will have to probably take your word for it because I don't know enough about the crypto market to really have a solid opinion here. But yeah, I mean, if it's going to affect pricing in the short term but long term be better, then the question is ultimately, why are they not rushing to do it? Viter Marino said 6900H and iGPU almost and RX 560. That makes sense. Yeah, especially considering that the 6500 XT, or as we should call it, Navi 24, was built with the intent to be paired with Rembrandt CPUs in the case where they need a graphics card that is better than what the IGP is, but not necessarily a large, very good gaming graphics card, just a base model kind of thing. And so yeah, 560 sounds about right to me. I guess we'll have to see when I don't know if there's actually any benchmarks out now. I haven't seen anything, but if you guys do know of any, please put them in the chat and we'll check them out.
Terry is right. Says Lockdown. The 5600X is a very good CPU, and the first counter from Intel is the 12400. Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that, and it goes on to say that if you don't need to cut production work time in half, this thing is gold. I ranted and raved about how good the 5600X was if you could afford it. I mean, it's as a gaming CPU, it's amazing. Especially if you need really high frame rates, this thing blows everything out of the water.
Jerry Watson said, it won't matter if Russia bans Bitcoin mining. ETH is tied to Bitcoin. Yeah, I mean, ETH pricing is going to be heavily tied to the current pricing of Bitcoin. I mean, all crypto is tied to Bitcoin, but I think ETH is the one that is probably most so at this point. And I don't know. I mean, I guess I would imagine a large amount of Ethereum miners are probably located in Russia, but I don't know if Russia banning crypto would, necessarily cause the market to crash. It might. It's definitely going to cause it to go down in the short term. But I mean, a lot of people have a lot of trust in crypto right now, and so much so that they are actually holding, assets in crypto for long periods of time, similar to how you would hold money.
So, Donny, it's kind of interesting because a big part of what at least it seems like the drop in Ethereum and Bitcoin is about is the news that, Russia said they're going to ban crypto and the fact that there's going to be some sort of a war, as far as we can tell, between Ukraine and Russia. And
potentially the US.
The idea of instability scares a lot of people and makes them pull money out of things. This always happens. I think you know this, Donny. Whenever there's a thought of war or shortages or what have you, markets tank. And the stock market took a pretty big tanking for about 2 or 3 days. It somewhat recovered. I don't know exactly how much better it got, but again, this isn't a financial analysis channel. This is a tech channel, so I'm not really going to sort of jump into really deep stuff about this. But I wonder, I have a feeling like it's going to go closer to what it was rather than tank to, like $1,500 like some people are thinking. But we had another question here with Aldous saying that he lives in rural Wyoming and there is exactly zero physical retail of computer components, and he lives 151 miles from the nearest Best Buy. So it's online or nothing here. In your case, it's very hard to buy, a GPU unless you want to look at those 6600s that we saw in Newegg. That's probably your best deal there. Terry, we clicked on the same one. Terry says that AMD's APUs, when they move to DDR5 and AM5, will be a game changer for APU graphics, as the DDR5 will have the bandwidth to move them closer to an actual GPU. Well, here's kind of the problem. Each time memory gets closer to graphics memory just gets faster.
Well, the other thing is, though, to remember is that, in terms of gaming, especially for graphics cards, latency is important too. And there's always going to be more latency when dealing with system memory and when dealing with on-board memory that comes from like a graphics board. So, yeah, well, I'd imagine AM5 and DDR5 is definitely going to improve things. There will always be a discrete card that's faster. But like I said, maybe it won't make as much sense for the very low-end discrete cards to be buying those at all. Although I would be very interested in seeing AMD do something with Infinity Cache, or of course 3DV Cache, or a combination. I guess those are interchangeable at this point, where an APU has access to Infinity Cache. because that could actually, along with DDR5, could actually be a huge game changer in APU performance, and I'd look forward to seeing that.
I mean, we asked for years if AMD would ever put up HBM memory in an APU, and that just kind of never happened. But we have another good comment here from KM Pewter, which is, I think we are in a new era of GPU pricing. Low-end GPUs will not exist, especially when chiplet GPUs become a thing and APUs get stronger.
I think that's entirely possible, actually.
Well, I think it's important, too, to see that the demand in the market has gone upwards generally over the past couple of years in sort of what performance bracket people like to be in. And low-end GPUs just kind of getting ignored.
Although, if you really think about it, in terms of the supply chain, though, it could be a really good thing if things kind of go that way. Because if the APU is capable of delivering the performance segment that you need at that low end to the point where you don't need to be selling discrete cards in there, that saves a lot of resources on things like capacitors, VRMs, even GDDR, even graphics memory like VRAM, because it's not being wasted on lower end boards. Because all of those resources are coming from the motherboard, the system RAM, etc. So that could be a good thing. That could be a way to drive down costs a bit too. Although I doubt that's going to be the case because, again, hellscape. But yeah, I mean, I look forward to the point when IGP/APU gets that kind of performance.
We have a question here from Max Settings, which is, do you think AMD and NVIDIA care if PC gaming becomes too expensive due to crypto? They seem to be the least concerned about gamers moving to consoles. So here's kind of a problem. A lot of people are asking AMD and NVIDIA to do a whole lot to stop miners from buying cards when I wonder what exactly they really could do. I've seen people suggest stuff like putting yourself on a list or, limiting the amount of people who can buy a card and like really extreme stuff that it seems like it's the kind of thing where I don't think AMD or NVIDIA really want to make this into like a breadline kind of thing. This is a graphics card.
So yeah, a lot of the things I've heard suggested about this really do kind of push back directly against the free market for one, and then things like everyone in I guarantee everyone in the gaming industry, I mean every PC gamer and tech enthusiast totally agrees with right to repair, right? You think a company should not be telling you what to do with the thing you buy from them so much so that you can't even fix it yourself. Right, great. We all agree with that. But then you have the same people saying, but maybe they should be able to tell us exactly how to use the product we buy to the point where we cannot use it for mining at all, even though it's capable of doing that. And that I'm a little bit more suspect on. I don't think it's okay for companies to tell us how we can use the products we buy from them. If they want to design a product for a stated goal and make sure it's optimal at that goal and at the expense of it not being able to do other things, that's fine. The product will exist in the free market and will live and die on its merits. But if all they do is software limitations to keep you from running certain pieces of software or workloads on something, even though it's perfectly capable of doing it, I can't get behind that. I understand the LHR thing and why NVIDIA is doing it, but I don't necessarily agree with it. And so far, it hasn't actually worked to help.
Here's kind of the problem. NVIDIA is still selling to miners directly for their mining focused cards. So it's not like they're taking those dies and they're selling all of them to you anyways. They're just removing features for. So here's a good example. I paid through the nose for my 3070, so I ran NiceHash on it in the background during the colder months this year. It was a way of me trying to make, I think I made like $80 or something off of it to feel better about how much I got, my shirt pulled over me.
Yeah, and for the most part, gamers who buy a graphics card should have the ability to take advantage of their ability to mine to make up some of the costs that they paid on that graphics card. That's perfectly reasonable.
Don Draper says miners would also pay more per unit than gamers would. Why would a business say no to that? Well, here's the truth. I think every single person who's sort of irritated about this would absolutely go work for somebody else if they offered them twice as much money to make, as there's, or 30% more or 50% more
for the same job.
for the same job. Now, the question is, are the miners going to continue to buy from it? Are the miners going to continue to do this? I mean, probably not, but here's the thing, and this is really important. We're going to buy graphics cards from them later because we like PC gaming. Very few of us are going to say, I'm really happy gaming on an Xbox, and this is the same experience.
Long term, maybe the only solution to this is to take a similar approach to what AMD did, but even further, in that products need to be graphics cards for gaming need to be designed inherently for gaming, and not be very good at doing mining. However, they can make that happen. With that is not just making a software limitation for the sake of just like here's a software governor, we're telling you what you can run on this.
I don't want you telling me I can't do 200 miles an hour in my car for whatever reason.
Even though you shouldn't, even though it's illegal to, the manufacturer shouldn't be enforcing the speed limit.
AMD and NVIDIA will burn the bridge now for money, says WorldTown FC. They can rebuild the bridge later. NVIDIA probably has the mindshare to do that. I mean, look, the truth is, all of us who are gamers, we're going to go and buy those mining cards for whatever insane price they are. So at the same point, how many of us are going to go, actually, when these cards are half as much, buying it used instead of buying a new one? How much of us are going to say, well, I want to support NVIDIA or AMD? We're not going to. The only reason why we won't buy them is because we're worried that those cards are going to catch fire. And you shouldn't. That's how things work. We shouldn't have these loyalties towards companies. And these companies shouldn't have these loyalties towards, or these companies won't have these loyalty towards us. Whether they should or they shouldn't is a whole different conversation. But they won't have these loyalties towards us. They have shareholders. They have market demands. The CEOs will get fired if they don't do the things they're supposed to do. This is just how companies work.
Nicodemus Stroud had an interesting point. I guess it wasn't really a question, but I was always under the assumption that one should not purchase a, quote, used card from a mining rig due to EOL. I mean, end of life. So in my opinion, if the price is right, you should definitely buy mining graphics cards because mining, obviously the card's running 24/7 and everything, for the most part, and this has been established by many people, doesn't really degrade the hardware too much, in the sense that
it depends, but go ahead.
You don't necessarily have to worry about the card not lasting as long as it typically would, or at least not to the point where it wouldn't make sense to take it at a much reduced price compared to retail, right? Because there's trade-offs everywhere, right? I think the most likely thing to fail on a mining card, though, is probably going to be the fans, which are pretty easily replaceable in some way or another. So if you're worried about the GPU core going out, that's unlikely. Memory, a little more likely, but still unlikely. VRM and power delivery, most likely of any actual component, but still not super likely.
So
because, again, we're not talking memory. We're not talking, mining doesn't have these spikes in voltage or temperature or anything. It's really rather consistent. Power delivery all times is really rather consistent, heat, all those things. So it's going to be okay. That doesn't mean that there is nothing to worry about when buying a mining card, but it's not something that you have to worry about to the point where you shouldn't ever buy a former miner card.
So what do we have here? There's a lot of comments here, but one thing I sort of want to get out there is my 1080 Ti that I bought from a miner once. I think it was Ethereum started dropping, or Bitcoin dropped a couple of years ago. Last time that this happened, ended up getting a decent deal for the card. And I spoke to the guy who bought the card, who was selling the card, and he showed me like pictures of his mining setup, and it was in a very well ventilated, clean room. It wasn't in some like dungeon where everything was dusty. And the guy had a box fan pushing air on the cards with a filter on it, which is something I actually do now as a purifier.
Something to remember is miners don't want to have to worry about a lot of cards going dead on them either. So they're going to take relatively good care of them.
over a thing. It was a smaller it was like a smaller sort of operation, and as long as the person maintains the cards, takes cares of them, cleans them, every 2 weeks or so, what you're doing is you're running these cards at lower temperatures, at lower voltage, because you don't want to draw full bore out of the power out of the card. I've bought used cards from gamers that were in much, much worse shape and blew up on me like 3 days later because it was some guy that played max settings and the thing was running 11 hours a day. Gaming loads are way more stressful than a mining load. It's just that a mining load is 24/7. Yeah, like Vitor says, overclocked, pushed to its absolute limit. Those cards are going to have more issues than a card that's mining and running at 60 Celsius consistently, 65 Celsius all day long.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say is if the mining crash happens or whatever, they switch to proof of stake or something that causes miners to just sell off all their cards in mass, those cards will be in the market then. And that's going to help drive prices down. And if people are actually buying them, that means that those cards from former mining cards are competing with retail cards from vendors, which is a great thing. And so you should never discount their viability as an alternative, because that's going to be former mining cards is going to be a big way for a lot of people who have been trying to get a card for a long time to actually finally be able to get one, because they'll be able to buy a 3070 for, maybe $300 or something, which is a great price.
It's definitely something to be picky on. See, the difference is if you go and you buy a card in a store, nobody's ever used it. And if it's just a bad one, you could just get the refund on it. You could send it into the manufacturer or what have you.
Listen,
there's definitely a risk taken in buying anything that's used.
There's nothing a car manufacturer would like more than for you to believe that used cars are a bad purchasing decision, because there's no warranty, there's no they're less reliable, they're more likely to break down, all of those various factors that come into play when you're making a purchasing decision on a car. But the fact of the matter is used cars are generally more affordable. Probably not right now because we live in a hellscape, but typically. And so why wouldn't you buy a used graphics card? And if it was used for mining or gaming, probably doesn't make a huge difference. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be picky. It doesn't mean you shouldn't kick the tires around and make sure that it's a good card. Test it if you can. But I think for the most part, you're going to be okay. Even if it doesn't last quite as long as a retail card, it's not going to cost quite as much as a retail card. So it offsets that way too.
Nick said I might have to rehab it, new thermal paste, etc. If you're dealing with a good miner, he will do all of that. And then somebody else said something about the flash BIOS and that sort of stuff. Most people don't overclock their cards because overclocking and putting the voltage higher draws more power. And what you really want is to get as much hash rate for as little power draw as possible. But most miners will reflash the card for you. They'll do all of the stuff that you sort of need.
Thanks a lot, Nicodemus. We appreciate the comment and the awesome feedback.
It's wonderful.
We're trying our best to, like I said, do this show every week at the same time, so that way people know when to expect it and to, come here, get some information, hang out. We don't know everything, obviously. Sometimes we're learning in real time with you. Sometimes you guys are teaching us stuff, so that's always cool too.
Stoned Ape 420 said mining cards are in better condition if literally optimized for mining. This is basically what I said. Low voltage, fan speed, and constant temperature. Yeah, so what happens to sort of get into the engineering thing, what's scary about graphics cards from gamers is you have a lot of thermal expansion and contraction happening where the cards go from 90 Celsius and they try to cool back down to room temperature and they go to 90 Celsius, 75, and then back down. And you have all these different gaming loads pushing the cards up and down. And this literally makes the material expand and contract. And it causes wear and tear on the parts. If it's sort of one continuous load over a long period of time, it's not as dangerous, or it doesn't wear the parts as much. You can have memory issues with with those cards sometimes too. Definitely make sure to check for artifacting though. Artifacting is the second most common thing that would happen. Now, nowhere near as common as the fan problems though. But the fan problems, if you've ever taken apart anything, you can take apart the fans, and because
I can
it's
tell you,
you don't have to worry.
artifacting is almost always going to be caused by some sort of memory degradation, or even whether it's the memory dies themselves because related to heat or something, they've been degraded and they're having bit issues, or the memory VRM, like the power delivery, is not providing the sufficient amount of power for the memory, which is causing issues. Both of those things can happen. And again, like Alex said, that doesn't mean it's super common, but it is something to look out for.
Now, again, it's not as safe as going out to the store paying full retail price, because you could get a dud. So this is but you could do that buying any used parts. So, if you're the kind of person who can't take any sort of risk, I completely understand just going and buying a retail card. But if you're looking for a deal or you can't necessarily afford something, it's a good way to take a shot to see what happens. And most of the time you'll be in a good place.
Doughboy said Vapors cards are actually worse than Smokers cards. That juicy they use, or that juice they use, I don't know why I said juicy, gets sticky over time and it can stick to the GPU. Smokers smell worse for sure. Yeah, I believe most vape juice is based on vegetable glycerin, which is essentially like a vegetable oil. And so, yeah, that doesn't, it does not turn into water vapor. It does eventually, it just sticks to things and stays there. If you've ever worked in a restaurant, you understand how dirty a hood can get from cooking with vegetable oil, and that you eventually need to clean your grease traps. And unfortunately, your computer doesn't have any grease traps because it's not supposed to.
It's vegetable glycerin that they use?
Mm-hmm.
That can't be healthy to breathe.
There might be other substances too, but from my understanding, that's a very popular one.
Okay. So M-Ice said that AMD and NVIDIA is constrained by lack of fab capacity. They're not limiting production without reason. And then he continued on saying maybe they'll be able to buy enough capacity to supply everyone by 2024. Then we can expect 7 nanometer and lower capacity from TSMC to finally increase. I mean, I suppose so. I hope so. Terry 3G says the weird thing with it is why are workstation class cards not being used for mining when a gaming card when workstation has more compute power?
Not necessarily.
They have very accurate like their workstation class cards are always 100% accurate, or as close to that as possible. They're built for different environments. They're not necessarily a whole lot faster than a gaming card, and they cost a ton of money.
I mean, looking at workstation cards though from both AMD and NVIDIA, at least the ones that you could buy on the open market, like that are actually available to consumers, rather than like instinct cards that are enterprise use. Workstation cards, for the most part, are based on the same silicon as the consumer counterparts. They have the same amount of VRAM, and I mean, they use similar VRAM at the very least. They're supplied by the same VRAM manufacturers. The only real difference is going to be in the form factor, like the heatsink and stuff like that, and then sometimes the power consumption, because they might be clocked lower or have fewer certain hardware that isn't as necessary. But for the most part, they're almost like for like exactly like gaming cards. They just use different drivers. And on the NVIDIA side, you're going to see a lot more like focus on making sure that the drivers can do certain things that the gaming card cannot do. But that's all it really is a software limitation, where mining does not really give a shit which driver stack you're using. And so there is no reason to spend more on the workstation class card.
Zero says that most miners downclock the GPU for energy efficiency. I mean, yeah, this is basically more of what we've said already.
That being said, I should point out, at least for NVIDIA, does tend to make workstation cards that will have more VRAM than the consumer versions. But again, costs a lot more, and there's diminishing returns with mining.
The amount of VRAM doesn't really matter as long as it's more than 4 gigs. I think it's 6. So whether you have 16 gigs or 8, I don't really think it makes a difference, because I think it just needs that much space in there. For my own personal experience, though, I will say the less VRAM a card has, when you're doing other tasks while
Mike,
it's
if you have any information you'd like to share with us in private at some point, please email, I think it's leaks@adoredtv.com, and we will respond to you in kind. Thank you.
rather buy a card from a miner than a streamer or something. I mean, a streamer that's running the game, that's gaming, 10 hours a day as his job, gonna put more wear and tear on it than a miner. He just is. I mean, I guess it depends on the games that they're streaming too, but if it's, AAA titles and he's trying to get a ton of FPS out of it, it's going to be there. So we have some more people talking about costs. Nicodemus, this is before he left, but he said, I've purchased used consoles that I've had to refurb before. So yeah, I mean, if you can refurb a console, you can totally take the fans off of a GPU shroud. And if you've already purchased it and, this company won't honor the warranty anyways, it's not really a big deal. You're not really worried about anything. Although they really can't hit you for removing those stickers anyways.
Why haven't ASICs made gaming GPU mining obsolete? Well, in the case of Bitcoin mining, that's pretty much exactly what happened, as I recall correctly. The reason why it hasn't happened for Ethereum is simply because there is no such thing as it stands as an ASIC that is capable of mining Ethereum that is going to be much more cost effective than graphics cards. Consumer graphics cards are more cost effective for Ethereum mining.
StarCraft Master asked if they are getting cheaper. If you watch the VOD later, we go into description as to exactly how much, but availability and stuff is getting better than what it was. Yeah. The mining algorithms were written to take advantage of gaming cards. Yeah, this is a specific thing with Ethereum because they didn't want ASICs to sort of take over.
I think the entire point of Ethereum was to kind of make it more of a democratization of crypto where you can easily, as a home user, be able to mine. Of course, that kind of backfired, but that's what happened. Jerry Watson, Intel is making a Bitcoin miner. I haven't heard that, but it doesn't surprise me. I mean, that's probably going to be a lucrative business for them.
Yeah, I mean, let's see. ASICs are insane prices and insane power consumption. So people at home can't run ASICs max 1 to 2 per house. He asked, Nicodemus is back actually. He said, I asked earlier whatever became of the HDD mining craze. I remember a panic on buy those hard drives. Not really. I don't think Chia really ever lifted off where the demand was.
I think it was more the tech press outlets just reporting on stuff just to kind of drum up attention for the articles more than it was an actual craze to actually go out and run out and buy all this stuff. Although I did see a variety of manufacturers actually release products that were focused on Chia, that were storage, that I thought was funny.
I guess those just never saw the light of day or sitting on a shelf somewhere.
Also, Mike Brazone, I have found your Seeking Alpha blog posts that you were talking about, and we'll reach out at some point in the future. Thanks.
Will there be ARM? Okay, maybe this is just an autocorrect based gaming PCs or gaming laptops, even though the NVIDIA ARM thing isn't going through.
Well, yes. I would say that regardless of whether or not NVIDIA buys ARM, we already have. I mean, in the case of Apple, they're pushing their ARM first and foremost now, right? And while they're not primarily gaming-focused machines, that's still a large amount of the desktop users, I'd imagine. And then on top of that, Windows on ARM is a thing, and there's more developments happening there. And then we've seen already examples of people using ARM CPUs and being able to use like an NVIDIA RTX graphics card paired with it, and run games like, I think it was Wolfenstein. I think I don't know if NVIDIA did this demo themselves or it was somebody else, but I remember seeing it. And so it's only a matter of time before actual systems come out that are running, relatively powerful Snapdragon CPUs paired with actual NVIDIA or AMD graphics cards. So, I mean, I think that's going to happen.
Dennis Kopp asked a question we've kind of been discussing for a while. Do you think GPU price madness will drive people away from PC gaming and cause permanent harm to said market? So I don't think so. And this is something we've kind of touched on several times. So as we've gotten older, I got in about 10 years ago. Donny, you've been PC gaming for what, like 15 years on and off?
Since I was 12 years old.
Okay, so longer than that. Almost 20 years now, I guess. The market for PC gaming has grown exponentially with the amount of people in it. So even if people like, say, me or you, or a good amount of the comment section, a lot of the people who are anywhere from 10 to 20 years old who didn't PC game before are jumping in now. And they are very much a part of this, and they are very willing to spend what we would consider absurd amounts of money on a system. Although it's funny to think about it, because spending $4 or $5 grand on a system wasn't that outlandish back in the day, but you would buy, 2 or 3 graphics cards and have a water-cooled system. And
that was still a very small portion of the PC gaming industry, to be fair. Like less than 1%.
That's fair. But again, I feel like there might be some people being pushed out of PC gaming, but I also feel like those people will probably be coming back. Keith from WCCF Tech, or now PC World, has talked about this to me before, where he was into PC gaming when he was a kid. And then as he got older, when the 360 came out and I think it was the 360, he just sort of bought a console because everything was too expensive, everything was too hard, and you could get really great performance out of an Xbox. And he didn't come back until towards the end of that generation for Battlefield 3 or Bad Company 2. It was one of them.
That's very comparable to my situation, actually. It's about the same time I got back. It's also the same period I wasn't really PC gaming, too. It's interesting.
So I think when eventually all of us that are going to be like, oh, this is crazy, I'm getting out of here, this is my number, I'm out, I'm just going to play whatever on the Xbox Series S, we're probably going to come back if it ever normalizes, or it's more comfortable, or there's that one game that we really want to play.
Oh, this was the wrong comment. Sorry, it moved. Don Draper said, gaming as we know it is probably going to change.
By the way, really flattering picture of Don Draper.
Yeah, I like it. It also gives the comment so much more gravitas, doesn't it? So, yeah, probably. And I mean, if NVIDIA has any say, they definitely want it to change. I mean, we talk a lot about NVIDIA would rather sell a graphics card to a miner, blah, 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 blah. But the reality is NVIDIA knows the gaming market isn't going away. The graphics cards for gaming and stuff. And they don't want it to go away. But what they would like to fundamentally change is instead of having to sell a graphics GPU core one time to an AIB partner who sells that card one time to a gamer, and then they wait till they upgrade and they sell it again, blah, 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 so on and so forth. They could sell you an RTX 3080 in the cloud, which they will do right now, and they could sell that to multiple users, almost as many as they want, and they could keep selling it over and over again because it's a leasing program. And you don't own the card, you never own the card, you never touch the card, you never see the card. It might not even be the card you think it is, but it delivers the performance of the card you want it to. And that's how it works. They make a lot more money per GPU core, like per GPU die that they have to buy from TSMC or Samsung or whoever on cloud gaming than they will on direct sales to consumers with actual physical graphics cards. So that's the future they want. The question is whether or not that future is actually any good for all of us. And if it may it makes sense, I should say.
Nicodemus kind of makes the same point with who knows what the future goes. I mean, I guess for some people, cloud gaming could be an option. It wouldn't be for me. It
So
really wouldn't be for me.
there's a variety of issues to tackle with cloud gaming. The first being latency. In the most optimal situation, latency is always going to be a problem. So can you play hyper competitive games with cloud gaming? And the answer is right now, no. Could you eventually?
God forbid you want to play video games on Christmas Day.
Could you eventually? Maybe. Then the other thing is access to high speed internet is still not that great, even in an economy like the United States of America. Rural areas do not have very good internet. Now, the things like Starlink are happening from Elon Musk and whatnot that could maybe address that. And maybe Starlink is exactly what the cloud gaming industry needs to, really be able to push out. And that's great. But I will say this. If anybody's ever tried to play a popular multiplayer game during peak hours on a very busy day, they know how annoying it can be and how difficult it can be to actually be able to play that game and not have any issues like stuttering, lag, latency, disconnections, etc., because the servers are overloaded by everybody else trying to play that very popular game.
Imagine instead of just the game that you want to play today, all of the games you want to play, you cannot play because it's all on the cloud. So you're just or servers go down for some reason. There's, I don't know, some sort of issue. Now you just can't play video games.
For everybody who made the argument that when the Xbox One was first announced, that, hey, how could you have this always online machine? What if I don't have access to the internet? Yada, yada, yada. Well, the same argument goes to the 10th power when being able to access your games at all requires an internet connection and a reliable one constantly, because
you don't own any of them.
They're in the cloud. Nothing is physically on your machine. You don't have a physical machine aside from basically a thin client that can access it, like a mobile device, a tablet, or a laptop, or just like TV. Cloud gaming to me is interesting. I like the idea that it allows more people to access to games, but I don't like the idea of it overtaking and being the only option. Options are great, but not ones that try to cannibalize other markets.
We have a gold comment here from HSS Reveneer, Nightmare Fuel. And we also have another comment from Aldous.
When you say gold comment, what do you...
Oh, it's great.
Oh, I was like...
that I never have to rent a GPU in the cloud. Yeah, no, I don't hope so either. But we also have another comment from KM again, which said APUs are quite capable. Most tech tubers push the narrative that you must have an expensive card to game. A Pentium and a 6500 would be a good combo. The entry level is actually low if you look at all. So it's kind of interesting because I've been getting called many names for saying that the 6500X is an option. Not even necessarily that it's a good option, but it is an option.
6500 XT?
Yes. For anybody that's looking to play Counter-Strike or whatever, there are still games that you could play with this hardware combo. And for some people, it's enough.
I think the 6500 XT is probably best for new builders because, like, obviously, if you're building a new system, you can account for its shortcomings, or maybe it'll be in a relatively cheap OEM system, which I think that's where the bulk of 6500 XTs are going. You're going to see a lot of them in gaming machines from Dell, HP, and the like. Whether or not those are systems anyone wants to buy is another question, but I think they might end up being. But for people upgrading, the 6500 XT doesn't look that good because who doesn't already have something as good as a 6500 XT that also has things like Gen 4 PCIe? Because if you have Gen 4 PCIe, that means that you have at least Ryzen 3000. And if you have a Ryzen 3000 CPU, you definitely have a discrete card. And if you have a discrete card, that you bought that recently, is it not at least somewhere in the RX 580 like range? And if it is, then the 6500 XT does nothing for you. So that's kind of the problem.
I mean, I think, like I said, it is an option. It's not necessarily a really good option. It might be just enough, though.
Yeah, I mean, if you have Gen 3, you should avoid it like the plague. But if you have Gen 4,
buy anything else around that price. So if you can get a 1660 Ti for around that price, it's relatively new, might be a better option.
I don't think you can, but sure. The just to get on the, like, if you're building a new system and you decide to get an i3 12, I think it's 12100 F or 12100, and you pair it with an RX 6500 XT, 16 gigs of whatever memory and whatever, you could probably make that build for around $850, and it's going to play games. It's going to be able to play Counter-Strike. It's going to be able to play Fortnite. It's going to be able to play, whatever esports title you want, and still be able to play some AAA games at, a reasonable enough FPS at 1080p at least. You're definitely going to want to be making sure you're playing on medium-ish settings. So.
Zero says that I started playing PlayStation Now for PC, and while some games will play just fine, others will be a capital nightmare because of said latency issues.
Yeah, I will say that it seems like PlayStation Now may be one of the worst platforms in terms of streaming, cloud streaming. My understanding is some of the other ones like GeForce Now or Shadow or even xCloud are all a little bit better than that one. Mm-hmm. But I haven't tested all of them thoroughly enough to know myself. But this is what I've seen from other people who have.
Sire Dragonchester. This is interesting because this is way before my time. I remember when our old Tandy 1000 SL2 and a 20 megabyte hard drive was 1200 Canadian at the time. That was on an Intel 8088/86. PC gaming has gotten so much better since then. I mean, yeah, if you were looking to game back in the day, a lot of people spent $5,000 in the 80s and 90s, which is a lot more money than it is today. Especially if you look at what you could have bought, or what people were paying rent back then. Terry 3G says that cable internet connections get bogged down when users hop on all at once because it splits bandwidth versus DSL or fiber. There is none of that. I mean, that's kind of, yeah.
Yeah, I have, upon moving to Houston, I found that my neighborhood did not have any fiber available to it. And the only option was Comcast Xfinity. And I got, I think it's 1200 megabits per second package, and what that has upload of a dog. It's literally it's like 25 megabits per second. I don't know what they're doing here.
Because no one ever uploads ever. Just
no. And I moved that. Whereas before I had full fiber 1000 up and down, which was fantastic. And I mean, between the fact that speeds are not that great, and then I constantly have service outages with the Comcast, I cannot wait to get rid of them. There are 2 different fiber companies that are currently rolling out. They're currently building out in my neighborhood. I cannot wait till they're done so I can get at least one of them, because cable internet is god awful. That's all I can say. God awful.
Nicodemus Stroud once again says, you haven't touched on this, but it's still in lieu of cloud gaming ideal. Thoughts on the metaverse, as I'm sure that will play into things to come, and I am not on board. I mean, we've talked about this before. It's weird. It's just, it's weird. I don't want to be in an alternate reality everywhere. I want to sit down and play a video game after I'm done with my day. I don't want the video game and ads to be thrown in my face.
So, I'm sure a lot of people here probably are familiar with or read or watched the movie like Ready Player One and stuff like that. I mean, The Matrix comes to mind, stuff like that. These sorts of futures where most people are sitting at home and living their lives via, virtual reality and whatever, they're not good. And so the idea that Facebook has with the metaverse, I mean, I'm not behind it at all. I don't think it's healthy for people to be that disconnected from each other. I think the pandemic has already created an environment where we're very disconnected from each other as it is. Hopefully these things start to heal and we get back to actually being people who communicate with one another and associate physically, in some form or another. And we don't just order all of our food through the internet and all of our products through the internet and sit at home all day long and communicate over the internet only and what have you. Because the biggest problem with that is that these major tech companies that control the data on the internet control the communication that and the discourse that happens on the internet. And so if the only way you could talk to your friend or the only way you will talk to your friend is over, metaverse, then how long before you're not allowed to say certain things in the metaverse, just like on Twitter, and then you either get kicked off or thrown in metaverse jail, and that's a big issue if a lot of the e-commerce is happening in the metaverse, meaning there are actual stores and such like that. I mean, we could talk about this for hours, but the fact of the matter is, I don't think it's a good thing. I think it's going more down the rabbit hole of things we don't need to be doing as a society.
I think Google has way more control over things than they really should as a company already. And the fact that we want to go even further just is questionable. I say this as a guy right now using Google servers to communicate with you.
Yeah. I mean, at least you could see our actual faces and not some weird avatars.
That's going to be really healthy for small children who are not used to human interaction. That just...
Geralt said, I talk with 6 to 11-year-olds all day. Is that healthy?
Are you a teacher? Do you work in a school?
If you're a teacher and you're a good one, it could be very healthy for the students. Obviously for yourself, I don't think it's unhealthy, but maybe you want to have some adult friends too, and to break the monotony. But if you're not a teacher and you're talking to 6 to 11-year-olds all day, I have to report you to the proper authorities.
I mean, maybe he teaches baseball or I don't know. If he works in a kid's store.
KMI 187 said, regulating big tech first, then move to the metaverse. No, just no metaverse.
I don't think mentally we're going to be completely healthy, operating completely off of a screen. I don't know, like the fact that you can go outside and speak to a person in person is very healthy to your own mental health. It's really important to us as people to actually touch and sense and feel things. I say this as someone who definitely gets too much screen time because of my job. And most of the friends that I have moved out of state. Really healthy to go outside every once in a while.
Also, I have to say, toss a coin to your teacher, oh valley of plenty. Oh.
Back to the thing that we probably should be talking about specifically. Hardware, which I think is more of our speciality instead of just staring out into the darkness, wondering what the future is. I have a 1080 Ti, says Dennis Coop, in my rig that I bought on release day for MSRP. At this point, I'm expecting to have to rock this GPU for another 5 or 6 years. Sad that it's worth more now than I paid for it new. So, I mean, I said this to a lot of my friends that had 480s and 580s and some of the AMD cards that were going for a fair bit. If you can sell your card for MSRP and you use it for 5 or 6 years, buying a new card for a ton of money probably isn't a bad idea, because you basically used your card at a profit for 5 years, 4 years. And selling it at that point, let's say you get $500 for it, spending $1,000 for a 3070 isn't necessarily that bad, because you have half the money out of pocket. We've mentioned this a bunch of times. There are people who traded 5700 XTs for 6700 XTs just straight up, or got money for them. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you could sell your 2060 for $500 and you spend $700 on a 3060, you spent $200. Let's see. Okay, Gerald actually made a point to this. He answered our question. He works in the building and he interacts with them. All kidding aside. Okay. Just
But let's just be clear. You're not like the janitor who molests them, right? No. Sorry, I can't. Like, look, I love being around all these kids.
Or it's the Happy Gilmore or the Billy Madison thing. I love to make sloppy joes for you kids. I know you love them sloppy. Nicodemus said, "I'll try to tune in as much as I can. I wish I had more brains to watch your streams, game, work, repeat."
I mean, if for whatever reason you can't catch it live, there's always the VOD. I know that means less interactivity, but if you throw a comment in the comment section down below afterwards, we respond to them. I have time on my hands.
Super appreciate if you guys just threw dollars at us. I'll not be in a hot tub if you guys throw enough money.
A hot tub?
I won't get in a hot tub. Yeah, hot tub streaming is the thing on Twitch.
I don't go on Twitch enough to know what god awful debauchery is happening at any given time. So
you stay out of the places on the internet that make fun of it too, I guess. Me and Johnny actually talked about that the other day.
I actually, since I've had my daughter, I do spend a lot less time on social media. I interact more in the various gaming and technology groups that I'm in, like on Discord, but that's about it.
Nicodemus said we already have our faces in cell phones as a society. I mean, that is absolutely a problem.
It's already not good.
My point is, we're already doing something that's probably not good, and then we're going to take it even more, even further than before. It's kind of like finding out lead is bad for you, so we decide maybe we should just put in our pipes, plutonium. That's a really good idea. Let's make plutonium pipes.
That might be okay.
Right? Dennis says that game streaming seems to be an impossible dream so long as the latency is as bad as I've experienced and ISPs continue to have horridly small data caps. It's interesting because somebody earlier in the chat said something along the lines of net neutrality and how important it was, or the fact that we don't have it anymore. Net neutrality, honestly, now that the tech companies are massive, doesn't really do anything for us anymore, because it's really designed to protect tech companies from the ISPs. It does nothing to stop the ISPs from having small data caps.
It almost looked like the stream froze, but it didn't. We were just very still for a second.
No Amaranth Twitch streams. Definitely not, Terry. Definitely not. We are not doing Amaranth Twitch streams. And we're not bringing on H3 or that other guy that they were on the stream with, that she was on the stream with a couple weeks ago in a hot tub. We're not doing any of that.
I don't want to be anywhere near Ethan Klein and any body of water. That's just the way it is.
I hope they all showered before. That's all I'm saying.
Don Draper said net neutrality is dead. I mean, probably, I guess. I don't know what the current FCC has really said on the matter, or whether or not they want to actually try to reinstitute it in any form or another. But the truth is I actually haven't, so net neutrality was never going to prevent data caps. That's not what it was. It's a stated goal. And then on top of that, when we had it, it didn't solve any of those issues. And we didn't end up having, once it was removed by the FCC under Ajit Pai, I think it was, we didn't see the types of things people were saying was going to happen, where you'd have to pay an extra fee to get access to certain websites, or
the Reddit
there'd be these tiered systems.
The Reddit fear-mongering, $5 Snapchat fee and $5 to go on YouTube. None of that ever happened.
I don't want anyone to get the idea that I'm some sort of crazy libertarian that believes that there should be no regulation on anything. I believe in reasonable regulations on certain companies and markets and stuff like that where it makes sense. That being said, I don't think net neutrality was a regulation that actually mattered. I think it was more of a political talking point or something that people really wanted to get behind, but it didn't really matter one way or the other for the most part.
No, I mean, SOPA and PIPA were really important for us rather than, which, I mean, now looking at it, were really sort of, they had these dystopian things in them, but the real designation of them were to try to create a trade alliance that sort of pushed China out, which may or may not have had benefits, but the sort of stuff the entertainment companies could have done, like coming to your house if you pirated movies, was insane. Let's see. Geralt said, NVIDIA's on my do not buy list thanks to you guys. It started when they sold the 2080 for 1200. You guys sealed the deal. I'm curious, what exactly made us seal the deal specifically on that?
Yeah, I don't know what I said that would give you the impression that I don't want anyone to buy NVIDIA. I don't, like, again, to me, I look at everything on a product by product basis. So, like, if there's something to buy from NVIDIA that's good, buy it.
When will we get Adored TV bottles with "All Right Guys" printed on them?
I did something like that. Like, I had an All Right Guys shirt and some other stuff, but I recently removed everything from the store except for one product line. There will be more stuff on the merch store if you guys want to check it out.
And please donate money to us because it really would help. Because, you know, this is the part Noctua isn't sending me any more hoodies. So
there should be like a merch shelf under the video on YouTube because that's how it works. But otherwise, man, I need to get the store login.
I need to cut you off for a second. Zero says, "Dear God, I can't even get away from hearing about Ethan Klein in a damn tech stream. What is this world coming to?" I didn't want to bring him up either, but you know, it's where we're at. I'm sorry, my Windows updates are being very, very difficult to avoid. They're just popping up and taking up my whole screen. Yeah, no, you can't escape the H3. You can't. It's weird because I kind of used to like some of his stances before when he had that lawsuit a couple years ago. How good is an i3 91F in 2022? Marginally less good than it was in 2021, I suppose. That's the quad core. It's fine.
I mean, if you really so, I'm not. I don't think you're asking if you should be buying one in 2022 because I don't know why anyone would. If you already have one, I think it's still okay. Maybe if you're feeling like you need to upgrade, maybe you can find a relatively cheap CPU that is socket compatible with your current system. If you can't, then you should probably be looking at Elder Lake for a new system.
Geralt asks all the shady stuff that mentions it's all the shady stuff they've done over the years. That's why he doesn't want to work with NVIDIA. I refuse to support companies like that. I mean, I don't blame anybody.
Far be it from me to go out and advocate for NVIDIA and try to change your mind on that
I'm not. Let's see. Nicodemus asks.
Hold on. I just want, because this is a follow-up thing. I am getting it for $50. So here's the thing about $50 for the i3-9100F. The motherboards on that are, if you don't already have a motherboard for it, those can be kind of expensive because they're no longer in production. And so sometimes you'll see a very cheap CPU from an older generation, especially Intel CPUs available, but then by the time you factor in the costs of buying a motherboard and other things that are tailored to that socket or to that CPU, it doesn't really make a lot of sense over getting, something more current. So I would definitely look at that, how much you have to spend on a motherboard for it, stuff like that.
What was the comment I clicked on before?
You said it was from Nicodemus, so
yeah.
Is it about USB-C?
Yes. As far as I know, the USB-C outputs, Donny, are just either HDMI or DisplayPort, just over a different connection. He's asking if this would help with output over DisplayPort. I don't think it would at all.
USB-C display out uses DisplayPort, basically a protocol as a standard. So whatever the DisplayPort capabilities of that graphics card are is what the USB Type-C should be able to do. It's not going to be any better or worse.
They just basically replaced
It
the
shouldn't be.
connector of a DisplayPort with a USB-C so that it works with VR headsets that
So it's
use.
a more convenient option for VR headsets.
This is if you, for example, instead of having to have a DisplayPort to USB-C cable, you could just have a USB-C to USB-C cable to output the video from your VR headset. That's really what it's for.
Yeah. One bonus use for that cable is that I believe it works as like an actual USB port too. So if you have like a USB device that is high bandwidth, like let's say an external like SSD or something, and maybe the ports on your motherboard are being used by other things, and there's not enough bandwidth for everything at one time. If you plug it into that graphics card port, it's not going to affect your USB controller's bandwidth, and so it's like having an extra USB controller essentially.
Max Settings says that I have a 4770K and a GTX 760. He sold his 1080 Ti like an idiot. However, I have a 1070 laptop and it's a beast. I can't wait to build a beefy desktop, waiting on prices to get better. Max Settings, you might actually like to see my upcoming benchmarking video I have with Alder Lake, because I am directly comparing it with a 4790K. I don't know if I'm going to do that in the initial video. It might be like a secondary follow-up video, but that's one of the reasons why I actually went out and bought an older 4790K, because I feel like that's one of the older Intel CPUs that a lot of people are sitting on for whatever reason.
And with that, I mean, we're 2 hours and 46 minutes in, so I think we're probably going to call it a stream here. It's been really fun hanging out with you guys and answering your questions and engaging with you. We hope to see you guys all here next week, same time. If there is a slight delay or difference in time, we'll notify as it happens. And we hope to get an interesting guest for next week. Not going to spoil who yet, but stay tuned for that. Okay. Have a good night, guys.